feel like the eggs over rice, the runny eggs over rice is like a recently come into my life.
Oh yeah.
Like growing up, I never thought about like, pork fried rice was a staple in the family when we get like Chinese food. But
that's cooked egg though.
But that's like little pieces.
Yeah.
But like, I think it was like, there's this bomb spot in the East Bay called Bird and Buffalo. It's like a really good Thai street food place.
Sounds good.
That's not like your like standard red, green, yellow curry. It's
right.
like everything's in Thai and it's a little bit more high grade. And they do like these rice bowls with the egg on top. And you never would think about it, but the yolk and the rice.
Yeah, when the yolk runs over the rice, it's really tasty.
Dude, fire, dude.
Yeah, it was an accident when I started doing it.
Yeah?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was making them that way, but then I just put it over rice because, Indian, so we just rice all the time. But, like, I had it, and then I had some avocado cut up, and I sort of just got lazy, and I kind of mixed it up. And then it was, like, this mash of egg, rice, and avocado. And I was like, dude, what? This is, like, pretty darn good.
With some turkey bacon?
Oh, yeah, well, I didn't have avocado today. It was just that. But, yeah, that's what I had. It was bomb. I liked it. I'm a big fan.
Dude.
Anything with rice, pretty much better. So.
Yeah, rice is nice. I've been trying to do the, like, no processed grain diet.
Oh, so like quinoa and stuff like that?
I don't even like quinoa, though.
Yeah,
just
I like
rice
better, dude.
Yeah. White rice, like, I pretty much, it's like I'm either doing that or like sweet potatoes as the base.
Sweet potato rice?
No, just
I was like, what?
Like my move these days, I kind of created this dish that's like, I cube sweet potatoes, I bake them with like garlic, toss them with salt and pepper and oil.
Sounds delicious, yeah.
And so they like, maybe for a half an hour so they get like kind of crisp. And meanwhile, I'm stir frying like steak and mushrooms and kale and ginger and turmeric and garlic. Then I take the sweet potatoes, I toss them in butter. Then I mix it with everything.
Oh.
That's what like my meal prep. I'll do like cook that on Sunday or Monday, and then I have like 3 or 4 nights of.
So you do meal prep?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
That sounds delicious.
It's bomb.
That
I mean,
good.
I'm still like, I feel like when you come up with a new recipe, there's an amount of time where it's still philosophical in nature. I've had a couple that have been like amazing, and then now it's just like tinkering. Sometimes I overcook the potatoes, or I'm like put the steak in too early so it gets too hard. Or
before you solidify the recipe.
Yeah. So I'm like burritos, I could cook a burrito perfect every time.
Nice. You've done it so many times.
I got breakfast burritos on lock. But the sweet potato thing, I'm a journeyman stir fryer.
It's yeah, exactly. Yeah. You've passed the wait. Is journeyman before apprenticeship or apprentice is?
I think it goes apprentice, journeyman, master.
Master.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Well, that means you're pretty far along.
Yeah.
So, that's the six-figure breakfast meal, dude.
The pipeline. Yeah. Dude, I mean sweet potatoes have come into my life like eggs on rice late. But they're so good when you do it right. Like if you make them salty, sweet and salty kind of vibe,
Food is just good. I'm just a huge fan. So,
would you have like a go-to meal that you like to, when you're like, you're not too lazy to like to go out to eat, but you're like, you have enough ambition to cook something? What's your go-to?
I do. You mentioned burritos, and it's like I do love them very much. But if you just do like fajita style type thing, where it's like if you just do the kind of a mixed veggie, it's like that. It's like it's enough where even if I don't, I definitely like meat, so I'm not a carnivore, but I definitely like to mix it up. So yeah, whether it's steak or chicken. But if I don't have any of that, even like vegetarian fajitas are like super bomb because they don't take that long to basically season, and it's like it's effectively using, Indian food uses a lot of the same spices.
Right.
Just throwing some cumin, it's like, dude, it's going to be good. It hits
chapati, tortilla.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're just speaking the same language in different ways.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. I'm a pretty big fan of that. That's pretty tasty. But then, like, Indian food also is really quick to make. So, like, depending on the dish. But, like, dal and rice, that kind of stuff is really quick. And then mixed vegetables are really tasty.
Sorry, I just put my phone on airplane mode.
Oh yeah, I should do the same. Anyway, sorry. Yes, I realize now we're talking about food. My bad. I guess so. I'm ready whenever you are.
Oh no, we're
we're
going.
in.
Yeah, no, dude, food is totally that's the diving board, bro.
Nice.
No, man, when I traveled to India and I learned how to make chapatis.
You
living
do them
on
by
this
hand?
beach. Yeah, because I fell into this group of people. It was like 7 different countries on this little beach in Gokarna.
Okay.
Kolkata. I mean, not Kolkata, Karnataka.
Yes.
It's right on the Goa-Karnataka border on the west coast. And there's like this magical little beach that you can only reach by boat or hiking in. It's like the size of a football field. And there's like this family that's like laying claim to like the beach.
Yeah.
Like an Indian family, like they come down every day and run a little restaurant. There's like this like cement area. So they set up their stove and they make thali, and it's like super cheap and it's amazing. You go swim all day. But I ended up living on this beach for 11 days.
Nice.
And I fell in with this group of people where like even the, 28 rupee thali is too much for them. So we started going to the market and like making our own, like we'd make like a masala or a dal and like just make chapatis. And there was a young Indian couple in our group, and they taught us all how to make chapatis. And we had like the plastic tube, and we're blowing on the fire. And
man, that's nice. Yeah. I've learned a couple times. I mean, I've learned throughout my life to make them by hand, but it is not something that I normally do. But yeah. Because like we grew up in our house. Anyway, I interrupted your story though. Sorry.
No,
so chapatis on the beach is pretty nice.
Yeah, and my reason for bringing it up was just that like there was a couple different times where I got to like have home cooked Indian food, which was the best. And I would always make burritos. Like anytime there was a thali as a Californian, I'd be like, all right, take the chapati, put the rice on,
the thing inside it,
put the dal on. Yeah, and everyone's looking at me and I'm like, yeah, dude, this is...
Dude, that's the thing that's so funny is years ago, so I have I don't know if you know this, but like we have a lot of siblings in my family. Like there's like Alam and Medina that are in my immediate family.
Yeah.
I
know the greatest hits, but give me the full discography.
Long story short is that there's 12 of us all together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so like there's 3 in our family, there's 4 in the middle family, and then the first family had 5. So we always joke that like musically it makes sense because it was 5, 4, 3. And it always goes 2 boys and a girl, 2 boys and a girl, 2 boys and a girl, which is crazy because it crosses over the 5, 4, 3. So we were like, nice, Dad.
What an achievement.
Yeah, well, he was a busy man, and then it's also like he just kept it musical the whole time. So our eldest brother, Ashish Khan, he's a brilliant Sarod player, but he's like he's the patriarch of our family now. But he one time was at our house, and like when maybe I was like in my late teens, early 20s, and he was staying over, and we had pizza that night. But then he had also made like chicken curry and some dal and some other stuff. And so so I was a teenager, and he's at the house, and I hear something in the middle of the night, and I was like, what is going on? So I walk out and go check in the kitchen. Ashish is there, and he's got slices of pizza, and I just see him lathering stuff on it. And I was like, what are you doing out here, Ashish Dada? And he's like, having pizza basically with chicken curry and dal. But the thing is, the chicken curry was still with the bone. Okay. So I was like, what do you mean? Like he just had this fat slice of pizza and just kind of like, wrapped it up and just put like chicken with the bone on it and then like lathered it in dal. And he was like, super good. I was like, what? I don't know. I did try a little bit of it, and I know that that's actually like a thing that became popular or is becoming more popular, like chicken curry pizza or curry pizza. Different, but I think all of that was to say that burrito style wraps with dal, rice, and things like that is delicious. And I actually am a slightly new convert to that. Maybe only in the last. Oh, dude, it's because of Keith Fleming.
Yeah.
You remember Keith?
Shout out Keith Fleming.
Yeah, what up, Keith? It's because of his river rafting trips, dude.
Okay.
Did you ever go on those?
No, I didn't even know that was a thing.
So his family has a rafting company that his dad started years and years ago, but now Bryce, his older brother, and him have kept it going. So D-Flem, Dennis, ran this thing, brought his whole family up, and train them, and then they used to bring all of their friends basically on these river rafting trips. I went when I was like 15, then hadn't gone back for a long time, and then basically have been doing it almost for many years in a row until the pandemic started. But we all cook for each other. So it's like, dude, it would be like, anywhere from like 8 to like 15 people sometimes, I feel like, maybe even more. But anyway, Indian food is great for, massive quantities of food. So basically made it, but then we started having, like, we'd be on the water, and then we would pull off onto some beach to like eat lunch. And it was like, we'd have like all this excess dal and rice and stuff. And so we would just make these burritos with dal, rice, like cheese, lettuce, all this stuff that I was like, what is this, dude? But I was like, yeah, why not? And then I had it and I was like, damn, this is pretty darn good. Yeah. I'm sold. So
fire. Yeah, dude, the cross, I feel like every culture has a wrap.
Yeah.
And every culture has like some form of dumpling.
Oh, sure.
I want to write a book that's like dumplings of the world, like whether it's like pot stickers, pierogies, you got pakoras, all the P words,
Yeah. That's funny too.
But like every culture has like wrapped stuff up. And then it's also like, we are empanadas. We have, here we have hot pockets, like.
Hey, those are good too.
Yeah, dude. But the I feel like
dumplings.
I feel like CPK, like California Pizza Kitchen, like did the Indian pizza. It's the first time I had it, I think.
Yeah, I wonder if they were the first ones to do it. I don't know if I've ever had like an actual like Indian curry pizza. I've only done it like homemade style. Yeah. Well, like pseudo homemade. I had the pizza already delivered, and then I added stuff to it. That's a new one. CPK, that's something I haven't thought about in a while. So yeah, they started the chicken curry or the Indian curry pizza phase.
I know there's also, maybe it's in the East Bay, or I know that there is like a legit like restaurant now that is like specializes in Indian style pizza.
Huh.
That's like, I think it's like Indian run, like it's like not just the Californication of
so
it,
using other different types of dishes.
Yeah, but it's like they're making Indian food, like even the bread is like naan rather than like pizza dough.
This is in the East Bay?
I forget. I remember seeing it recently, and I forget if it was like in the East Bay or it could have been somewhere else that I was traveling. Yeah, or in South Bay. I mean, it would make sense if it was like Fremont or San Jose or
I'm gonna have to do some digging into this.
Yeah, but it looked bomb, and I feel like you see a lot of different spots playing around with that, and it's cool, man. It's cool seeing how different cultures, blend the great melting pot of the U.S. There's so many different fusions that get created.
I know food is one of the greatest crossovers. It's just too good, man.
What's your like? Did you guys have a dish like growing up in the fam that was like the dish?
Oh yeah. So we definitely do. Well, for me, there's a bread called puri, which is like it's basically like a flatbread, but instead of kind of puffing it up like on a flame, you deep fry it, and then it puffs up that way.
Yeah.
And so it's it takes a bit more to make. It's not just like rolling it. It's either way. Once you've already gotten to that, I think step of having to like lay the flour out and actually start rolling it, you've already done the extra mile, so you may as well just go and deep fry it instead. But it's so good. It's like it's light and fluffy, even like day old, like the next day once they've kind of gotten a little soggy and cold, like they're still just delicious. But that with almost anything is like on point
fried
for me.
Dough,
dude, I know fried dough is another thing. Almost pizza by it's so bomb, dude. But like, I guess I don't know if that's fried necessarily, but still.
Donuts are
bomb.
cakes.
Yeah, this is less sweet. This is more savory.
Okay.
But so that with what we call like aloo curry, so it's potato curry. And so there's like, the old spots in the train station, like train station aloo curry, which is like, they'll just have like this really delicious potato curry that you can buy at the train stops, and then it'll just have like lathered and greasy puri and stuff like that. If your stomach's not up for it, that'll definitely set you back. So that's one of those ones where it's like maybe don't eat that when you're like taking off on your journey,
right?
Or you're gonna be
belly.
you're gonna be taking a break for a while while you don't have that as your first meal, we'll say.
I got to experience that traveling India, and it's true. Like, I think this is a thing that I see exist in so much of the world outside of the States, which is like something about the way, I don't know if it's like the way that we construct that the culture is here, but like I experienced this in like Italy and in like other countries, but definitely in India, where like I would go into like a train station, and I've gotten the puri with the aloo curry, and like it's like this person who set up their like establishment at the train station, which makes sense. And it's like this person is like a world class. It's not maybe the best for you, but the like flavors are like the chai that I had on the trains was like like unlike any other chai, you know. And, you know, I went the probiotics and grapefruit seed extract route and kept me pretty good.
Oh, to save you.
Yeah. I only got sick once in India because I got tricked into drinking bad water in Mumbai, which laid me out. But even with that, like I wasn't throwing up. I just had like a bad fever for like 5 days. Yeah.
And well, that's pretty lucky for having drinking the tap water.
Yeah. It was.
It
was intense.
All I can say is I can commiserate, and I'm so yes, that would be a spiritual experience, dude. Yeah, that's one of those where it's like if the food is so good, and it's like if your stomach isn't ready for it, then it's like you'll get messed up. But if you can make it through that first initial kind of like getting used to everything, then it's like then you can just kind of indulge, and hopefully you don't get worse. But
and I think what a lot of people don't understand is like, I know there's a certain amount of people whose stomach gets set off by the spice. You know, like, which I'm grateful. Like, growing up in our family, we always had my mom cooked a lot of Indian food, and we always had a lot of hot sauce and everything. That's never really messed with my stomach. And when you go to these other cultures, like, that's actually making the food cleaner. Like, a lot of those spices have antimicrobial properties in them too. Like,
to make it more palatable to your stomach.
Yeah, like I think that there's, you know,
you can burn out any of the issues
exactly.
With it. Well, it'll burn out one way. Once you handle the first
one under the other.
I know. It's like it's really funny how that works. But I'm sorry that you got sick drinking the water, dude. That's like the you know, it's like an urban legend, but at the same time it's totally legit, where people would like tap the bottles and then like fake tap them on or screw the caps on, but like have the sealer. Yeah. And then you could like buy
this was even more kind of head scratchy and infuriating. I went out to eat. It was a decent restaurant in Mumbai with my friends, and it was like a friend of my friend, and it was at the end of the meal they brought the water with the lemon.
Oh yeah, to wash your hands.
To wash your hands, but I being a foreigner, like didn't understand what He
told you to drink it,
and I was like, I asked one of the other Indians at the table, and I was like, hey, like, is this for drinking? And he's like, yeah. As a joke, but he didn't watch. He didn't like keep watching to make sure I didn't drink it.
And then you drank it.
So I took a sip, and then one of the other friends at the table was like, "Don't do that!" Like,
no.
And I'm like, and I was like, "What the hell, man? Like, you gotta make sure." Like, he's like, I was joking. I was like, "That's fine, but you gotta like."
Let me know
like, make sure that I don't, because I took him at face value.
Well, you're trying to be respectful also, you know, don't try to insult anybody like that. And also you ask somebody a legit question. And
yeah,
like, man.
And so he was like, I'm sure you'll be fine. And then I woke up like the next morning and it was just like, it could have been a lot worse. I think the fact that I was taking probiotics this was like maybe a month and a half in. So I'd been taking probiotics every day.
And you'd already been eating and stuff like that. It's not like you hadn't been eating.
Yeah, and I'd had like, deli belly a couple times.
Yeah, you'd already gotten some of the.
It had the digestive stuff, but it wasn't too intense. And then and then I was also taking grapefruit seed extract, which is I recommend for any traveler. But even with all that, I was like in bed for like 5 days, and it definitely was. I feel like almost like a badge of, every traveler has their story. You kind of got to
was your story.
Go through it once. I was like, it hurt, but it was.
That's a good story though. I mean, like that actually has like a whole aspect to it with the accidental aspect of drinking the lemon water for washing your hands. You'll know that to never do that again.
Totally.
Yeah. That sucks. I'm really sorry to hear that you had to go through that, dude.
And I was also super lucky though, because I was staying at my friend Sandeep's house, who was like, you know, shout out Sandeep. He's been on the podcast before.
Sandeep.
It was, you know, the Indian couple that I was living on the beach with.
Oh, nice.
And him and his girlfriend, I was staying at their place in Mumbai, and they were just the best people, the sweetest people. They like gave me their bed to be sick in for 5 days and just really took care of me. And I just, as luck would have it, I got sick, but I was also in this like very nurturing environment
to get sick.
Yeah. Like it was almost like this opportunity to be like as vulnerable as a baby and like have the perfect person who like
to help
totally gets
nurture
it.
you back to health.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, versus being like in an apartment somewhere where you don't know anybody, you hadn't like connected with some sort of community or somewhere to help you, and you're just like laying in the room by yourself. I've heard of friends having to deal with that, and you're just like, that is so sad, and I'm sorry that you had to go through it, but I'm glad you made it through. Yeah, because I've never had that experience. I've only traveled to India. Every time I've ever been has either always been with family or staying with family or like close family friends type of thing. To just like hit it solo is a journey, dude. But to answer your question originally, because it's you asked what was like the staple, it's puri and like aloo curry, basically that. And then like, you know, for us it's like if you have lamb curry or something like that, that's like, those are like the, anytime we have like a holiday meal, that's like the stuff we go for. It's like, or you do like coconut dal, and like it's not necessarily with garbanzo, it's not chana, but it's like just like thicker lentils. And so like if you do that, like this coconut style dal that my family makes with aloo curry and puri, it's like, if I could request any meal, that's like the one.
That's the one,
dude. It's just because it's so nostalgic.
Yeah.
That it's like there's so many memories associated with that particular meal.
Yeah.
But anytime, dude, like, because I'm going on Sunday and in like a few days back to India, it's like I'm just like, dude, when I can have puri and an omelet.
Yeah.
Dude, it's so good. I'm stoked.
Dude, the
I
omelets,
can't wait.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Because the omelets are so different over there too.
They do differently. They'll do like green chili and they'll throw in things like that too.
And it's kind of like tasty. A flat plate, or like, you know, like we do the fold, but like, a lot of the omelets I had there was almost just like they never folded it.
Yeah, I think each well, also then it's like, you know, because India is so massive and it's so vast and there's so many different cultures within India, the culinary, you know, magic of the country is just totally different, dude. If you're down south, it's like the types of dishes I get there versus growing up, you know, Bengali. It's like our dishes compared to, you know, so many other places. There's so many different styles. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Flat omelets. Yeah, I mean, like that. Like, dude, I'm just stoked. Like, honestly, kind of eggs are just delicious. So like, so I can't really go wrong. But
I know that's a trip too, because like, you know, we grew up together,
right?
And when I was getting ready to go to India, I hit you up. I hit a bunch of like my Indian connections up, and then realizing like the part of, you know, I just assumed like, go to India, I'll experience maybe some of like where Manik comes from, and then I learned like that you got, you know, as it were, my journey, I saw like so many different cultures, but I never got to experience like any of the East Coast or the Bengali culture.
Got it. I didn't know that.
Next time, you know.
Yeah. Oh, there's plenty to explore.
Yeah,
dude.
yeah. I did the whole West Coast from like, you know, Trivandrum up to Dharamsala.
Oh, nice. You went to Dharamsala. That's
Yeah.
one place that I would love to go.
Dude,
I've never been.
Highly recommend.
That's what I hear.
You know, it's like it's like a day by bus from Delhi.
It's not too bad.
Yeah, not too bad. And it's a really cool bus ride because you start out in the basin, you know, the Indian basin and like all the agriculture. And then you hit the foothills of the Himalayas. And it's really just like
up,
just straight up.
Dang.
And like, you know, McLeod-Ganj, which is kind of like the capital zone. It's where the Tibetan government in exile is. It's like this cool village along the cliff looking down into the Indian basin, and you can just see like the subcontinent just extending into infinity.
Forever.
Yeah. And
how cool.
It was a trip for me because I was coming from Pushkar, from Rajasthan.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the whole trip up north, like starting in the south and coming north, it's like you get in pockets where you're like, okay, I can see churches here, or now I'm seeing
For
mosques.
for sure.
And like going from Rajasthan, which has a lot of Islam, and the whole time a lot of Hinduism, and then coming up into the Himalayas, and you start to feel the Buddhism in the air, and it's like it was like this subtle, intangible flavor, but I started to like feel like that change come, and it was really at a time where I was like 2.5 months in, so much noise. I was a little bit like overstimulated and was looking for Shanti, and finding it up there was, it was like, it was such a nice exhale.
Out into the mountains, above everything. Yeah, like even just smog and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Wow. Yeah, that's another reason to be out there. I've spent a little time in the mountains, but not nearly enough. And then it's like I actually went down south in 2020 before the pandemic started. I was down in like Kerala for the first time ever in my whole life.
I love it. Oh, it's so nice.
Dude, it was definitely a different place.
What part of Kerala?
I was like I flew into Cochin, and then I was like 2 hours, I think, like north of it. I forget what the actual city, what the area was, but there's a famous dance institution there that focuses on like Kathakali and Kudiyatam, these old traditional dance styles.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for a performance at this institution, and then I got to stay with some dear old family friends. One of the guys who actually like was responsible for my dad basically being here in America back in the 50s, which is crazy. So he's an elderly man now, and so he was very deeply associated with down south in India. So I went to visit him, played this concert, and then got to spend a lot of time in this, like, I think it's like a 5th century temple.
Wow.
I could be 12th century, and those are vastly different times.
Yeah.
It was like 2 years ago, or it was like 1,500. But this family basically runs this old Hindu temple, and it's been in the family for like generation. But I got to watch a number of these performances of Kathakali and Kudiyatam like in there, and dude, these are like it's a trip. I don't know if you're familiar with these dance forms, but they get very decked out into different garb and lots of face paint, and just like really. The whole process of it is pretty powerful to watch them, and it's kind of like, I think, like the tradition of even just transforming into these characters, and these would be like mythological characters from different stories, and really pretty intense. Like, it's like ancient CG, man. Like watching what they were doing for the cosmetics and turning people either, I don't know if it'll only be men playing female figures, or if it also can be female figures that play men. I forget. But the one that I saw was this pretty intense story of Ravana, the ancient king who steals Sita. I don't know if you're familiar with Ram and Sita. This whole story has like Hanuman jumping across the water from South India to Sri Lanka. Have you heard any of these stories before?
I might have. That one might have gotten touched on, but it's been 5 years.
Well, it's also like there's a whole mythology. There. It's like it's a deep cosmos.
There's a lot of stories.
Yeah, so effectively, to not belabor it, it's basically like there is this Sarpanika is like this demon goddess, so to speak, and she tries to trick some of the characters. And there's a very famous man who plays as he's one of the more famous dancers of this character. But the way that they had him transform into Sarpanika, there was like fire, blood, and gore, and it's like stuff is like flying everywhere. And it was like, these are like pretty epic performances, and they'll be like 3 hours, 3.5 hours. And you're just, it was dope. It's like outside in the kind of like this special area of the temple. And, it's just lots of music, really powerful stuff. Anyway, I got to see that there, and it was like the first time I'd been able to see either of those dance styles in person.
Were you just as a spectator, or were you performing as well?
No, in this case, I was a spectator.
Okay.
No, I performed for this institution that was there, but then I got to watch some of it while I was there. But what was the point I was trying to make? It was about the one of the coolest things about it is just like the age-wise is that it's like the ancientness of it. I forget if it's Kudiatam or if it's Kathakali, but one of them has one of the longest standing still spoken versions of Sanskrit. Like when people say that Sanskrit's like a dead language, it's like, well, it existed in this art form, and people like recite and sing in this mixture of multiple languages, but Sanskrit's part of it. And I guess it kind of blew a lot of scholars' minds, because it was like, you know, from like the kind of Eurocentric like academic model, it was like, oh, Sanskrit's a dead language, like no one speaks it, and it's like, well, did you go south? Because it's like it's still being spoken. Like, what do you mean? Hold on a second. So I think there's been a lot of other scholarly stuff around it that it's like kind of changed the conception that you get to hear. It would be like having you know, some early form of Latin. Early form of Latin. Latin's pretty old, but like whether contemporary scholars are trying to like kind of create how it sounds now versus like being able to hear some version of it from like 1500 years ago, or 1,000 years ago even. And I think in this regard, unless I'm totally off base, so don't quote me on this, but this is my understanding of it, because it was pretty fascinating, was that there's this form of Sanskrit that's still being spoken from like 1,000 years ago, where this dance form was really like becoming a deeper tradition.
The dance form's been like a sacred vault to save the language, or to it's funny when you said that, because it brought into mind like Sanskrit's also something that I feel like is kept alive by like tattoos.
Oh yeah. Well, people write
it's such a common thing that you meet someone that's like, oh, it's the Sanskrit word for transformation, or you know, I think I thought about getting like anicca on my, you know, after my Vipassana, you know, like, and are you familiar with anicca? Like,
no.
It's like I think it's the Sanskrit word for impermanence.
Impermanence. That's a pretty powerful word to get.
And I thought just something about like tattooing impermanence permanently on my skin, like it made me laugh inside.
For sure, of course. There's definitely an irony there, but like well intentioned.
Yeah, but the
you didn't do it though.
No.
Yeah.
I was looking up Dharma wheels, looking up like what the Sanskrit word would be, and then I think like, not that it wasn't even that I like was necessarily against it. Like I still feel like it would be a cool tattoo to get. Yeah. Maybe I do get it someday, but there was also something about like putting like a symbol on my body that I don't fully understand, and like I'd almost want to figure out how to read, even if I don't, like, not saying I could learn to read Sanskrit.
You could.
I could, but like I'd want to at least be able to look at the strokes and know the sounds that each shape was making, rather than just putting like a word on me that it's like, oh, that like shape means this idea, which is cool. I think that's why I never felt as like motivated to get it attached to me.
No, I feel that. I think it's a pretty reasonable and respectful way to go about it. Because you have to trust somebody at the end of the day. Plus, also then for the artist who's tattooing it on you, you got to hope that they like understand exactly what you want. Exactly. The stroke's not in the right place. All of a sudden, it's like, well,
you got dog ass on your dog butt on your.
Yeah, you know, I don't. Yeah, that's. I'm trying to think, because it's like anyway, it was just really cool, and it was a really sweet idea, or something to experience while I was there. But yeah, I mean, this is to go back to what you were saying, just being in the mountains. It's like India is so massive, being able to explore all just these different sections, between like massive jungle to like really deep desert to then, you know, like beautiful mountainous terrains to, you know, the Annapurna mountain range. Mm-hmm. It's like, dude, the Himalaya is like it's the tallest mountain range on the planet, right? So
it's really that big.
That's crazy.
I could like picture, you know, you always hear pictures don't do it justice, but like it's honestly the biggest thing I've ever seen are these, like, even seeing the first range, which is, you know, not even the biggest part, but like the contrast, like I don't know anywhere else in the world where you can go where there's such contrast. Like usually you're like 20, 30 miles of foothills, then you get up to the high peaks. but it was
it's
like
just bam
on my right.
It just
There's
gets you.
plains. On my left is like, 15,
Never-ending.
16, 17,000 foot peaks. And
Yeah, mountains going into the heavens.
it's crazy. But now at 35 minutes into the podcast, I want to introduce my guest here, Manik Khan. For those out there, hard to believe that they exist, but people that aren't aware of you or your music, how do you describe yourself as an artist? Like, what would be the words you would use to describe your art and what you do?
Well, I focus on classical music from North India. I'm like looking at the camera as if I'm talking to other people at the moment, but I'm talking to you.
You can talk to me.
Yeah. Classical music from North India. This is what we play. We being my family, and it's something that's been basically passed down in my family since the 16th century, which is pretty powerful. So it came from my grandfather to my father, and then to myself, and to many of my siblings. And then, it's the instrument that I play is called the Sarod, and it's like a 25 string. I mean, you've seen it, but you should definitely look it up. You can spell it Sarod or Sarode. It looks like Sarodi, but it's Sarod. And it's a beautiful, beautiful instrument that looks almost like, they oftentimes will refer to it like an Indian lute. Mm-hmm. But again, that's that Eurocentricity, man.
Right.
Dude, everything's related back. So it's a Sarod, and it's like but it does kind of have the same sort of body. It's basically elongated this way. It has a steel plate. It's made out of like a solid piece of wood or two pieces of wood. They'll hollow it out. They'll put the plate on it, have a skin head around it, and it just makes this really resonant sound because it's got 25 strings and there's no frets. And we play with like a coconut shell. Although people have made all types of different materials for the picks now. But
is it the one that has the big metal, like where the frets would be? There's like that metal plate, or is that the sitar?
Yeah.
I always mix those two up, the sitar and the Sarod, even to this day.
Well, it's like definitely pretty. I mean, I think sitar is the most synonymous, I think, with Indian classical.
Okay.
Because everybody knows the sitar because of Ravi Shankar and for Pandit Ravi Shankar, and then George Harrison of the Beatles played it, and that's like all the stereotypes of Indian music. Generally, we'll use like a sitar, and then it's like even here, it's like, well, this is a veena, but that's a tanpura. I'm looking for images, which you can't see on the screen right now.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's sitar and Sarod are like brother and sister.
Okay.
With the Sarod being the brother, they say.
Gotcha.
It has a bit of a bassier tone, but it has this steel plate. Yes, so that's the one that you play like a guitar, but you don't have any frets, and then you slide with your finger pad and your fingernail on the steel plate with the string, and that's what makes the sound. But you have 25. You have 4 main playing strings. Well, in our style, there's different styles of Sarod. There's like different families, which we will call like a gharana. It's like a school, basically, of a style of music. And so in our gharana, our family style, our Sarod has 25 strings. My grandfather and his brother, I believe it's, I should know this, but it's Ayed Ali Khan Sahab, I'm pretty sure. Him and his brother, which was my grandfather, they were both like musical inventors and craftsmen. And so they just tinkered and kept creating new instruments. And so they made this version of the Sarod that is a little bit longer, has more pegs. And so it has more resonance because of these extra strings. Whereas there's a couple other major schools, major families of this music for Sarod specifically. And I believe one of them has, I might be wrong, but I believe one has like 19 strings, and I think one has 21 or 23. I should know this, and I do, but I'm blanking right now. So I clearly don't know it, actually. I need to go look that up. Whoops. Yeah. But beautiful. They all have different sounds, and they'll have slightly different shapes. And so each one kind of caters to the style of the family and what their music sort of, the ways that they approach the Sarod and development of music. So if you were, that's a long way to describe what I do, but yeah,
I love it.
Dude, it's Indian classical music from North India.
This is long form conversation. You can take as much time as you want.
Yeah, we did talk about food for like 35 minutes, and we didn't even scratch this. We scratched the surface. It's classical music, so we call it Hindustani classical because in India there's 2 major forms. Well, you can just basically break it up to like the northern style and like southern style. So like it's Hindustani for the north and then Carnatic music for the south. And it's crazy because the 2 have bases basically in the same foundation of the history of it, of where it created and where it came from. But over the course of, you know, thousands or hundreds to thousands of years, the musics have really sort of diverged from each other. And so Carnatic music is quite different from Hindustani, and Hindustani is quite different from Carnatic music, even though we'll have a lot of similarities in like the types of melodies that we play. But it's even the approach of how we show ornaments and slides, to the way the same raga, our form of music, or the form of the melodies, might even sound. We might have the same name for it, but they may sound quite different, or they're based on something that existed from a long time ago. So Hindustani classical music is what I do, although we were talking before it off camera about, you know, both having a history in, you know, electronic production and kind of getting our teeth wet on, like, you know, making hip hop and electronica and stuff like that.
Yeah, I had this memory that came up when we were having that conversation of, it was like such a Bay Area moment. You know, I think this was like in my early 20s, and I saw a performance here. We're sitting here in the Ali Akbar Khan School of Music in San Rafael, California. And I was here at a show, and I was watching, shout out Nilan, our friend, your you know, basically music brother.
Yeah.
And I was listening to him play the tabla, and I was like, dude, there's some Bay Area hip hop in that. Like, you can, you know, you can put the boy in a new tradition, but like you can't unhear the music that's inspired you in your life.
Absolutely.
And I was listening to you as well, and I heard in both of your guys' styles of playing, like there were pieces in there that were like, they spoke to me, you know, not just as like, you know, looking from the outside in to a, you know, a musical tradition that I was a stranger to, but also like I was able to hear like, oh, there's like some of where I'm from in that music. And it was this like kind of philosophical aha, where I was like, oh yeah, like we are like, no matter what kind of music you play, like you can't get away from the stuff that you grew up listening to, and it's all experience.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would want to either, right? Because it's like there's so many good musics out there. And then you know, for my family in particular, because of our mom being, you know, born and raised in the US, she grew up, you know, in the hippie era. So it's like we grew up having like Jimi Hendrix and you know, Mamas and the Papas, and just so many.
Grateful Dead.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny that like, you know, we didn't actually listen to the Grateful Dead. The Dead actually, though, my mom is dear friends with Mickey Hart, who's, you know, the drummer, and it's like, you know, those guys, that there's so much connection between the musics all throughout the Bay Area that it was just a crazy time. So like growing up, we got to have like this really wonderful kind of blend of like so many different styles of music, and then this like deeply rich version of Indian classical from our father. And yeah, it's super fun, man. I mean, yeah, I feel super fortunate that I got, and Nilan too, all of us that, you know, kind of grew up in the Bay and grew up in this music, got to have this really kind of varied and sort of this whole multitude of different musical styles to sort of draw from, while having like a sincere focus on Indian classical. But
what's in the music like itself, in the style of classical that you play, what's the role that the Sarod plays in the music? Like, is it like the melody line?
Yeah.
How does it serve the song, I guess?
Yeah. So it's, you know, Indian classical, because there's a bunch of different styles again. But if you look at it specifically, like the way that we're trained in it, there will be generally like a main soloist. So whether or not it's a vocalist or whether it's Sarod, we're doing okay for...
Yeah, we're good. Just ignore me. I'm just fussing, but I'm listening to you.
Yeah, no problem. Making sure the batteries are okay. If you have you'll have like a main vocalist or main, you know, instrumentalist, so to speak. So if it's just, you can kind of think of it as like soloist, tabla, and then like tanpura is kind of one of the ideas. If it's an instrumental side, if it's on like Sarod would be the main kind of lead, and then you have tabla, which is keeping all the rhythm and is accompanying that way, and then you'll have like tanpura as well.
Will you explain just what a tabla is for people that have never heard the term?
Yeah. So tabla is are two sets of drums, but they'll call it one. Basically, tabla is actually the kind of brighter drum, which traditionally is played with the right hand. The baya is played with the left hand, the bass, And so, but together they're also called tabla.
Gotcha.
That's like, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. That's
Is
probably
the
most
baya the one
simple.
that has all the slides?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's baya. So, I mean, there's other names actually traditionally formed too, but that's how you'll hear it. So tabla are these two drums basically together, and they are just insanely. There's so much you can do with them, because it's like that's one of the fun things about Indian classical, especially with tabla, is that all the notes that you play on the drums you can recite. There's a language form. So, you know, bol means to speak, bolo depending on where you're coming from in India, but the bols for tabla are specific notes. So there's like da, terekita, tin. There's all these different ones, and once you put them together, you're basically creating this sort of musical language. But everything you say, you can play, and then everything you play, you can say.
Yeah.
So you get this like really awesome recitation. Where, of course, that's another one that'll obviously people for like hip hop and stuff. If you start getting into these crazy rhythm cycles where they'll start reciting all these things, it can really, of course, bring all sorts of parallels to lyricism and all this kind of stuff.
Totally.
And like really crazy rhythmic rappers, which, not to get into a segue, made me always fall in love with rappers that were like way crazy with rhythm. Pharoah Monch is like one of my favorites of all time, because he would get into these really crazy ways of just going all over the rhythm and extending sounds, and really, really fun kind of like lyrical wordplay and all this kind of stuff. But for tabla, that's what it sounds like. So you have this bass hand on the left, generally the brighter side is on the right, and then together the tabla, and it's what holds everything down.
Yeah, I remember Nilan like reciting some of the vocal exercises to me, and it was just like, dude, it sounds so similar to the drum. Like it changed how I think about, like, when I would listen to tabla, I'd think so much more like as the human voice,
right?
Which I think is part of it, right? Is like really associating in your body, like it's the talking drum or the speaking drum.
Yes.
And you do start to hear that language and those patterns. And
yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Like, there are obviously, I'm forgetting which part of Africa has it, but there's some really famous like actual talking drums, and I think that's what you were hinting at, right? Like where the drumming itself is making sounds that are in the actual language. So by hearing the drums, you can actually be talking and expressing.
I know in the Caribbean too. I think like in Cuba, there's like Santeria, part of like the Santeria music has like a talking drum involved with it.
Well, it makes me wonder if through slavery that
transferred
it's
over, probably
right?
some Afro-Caribbean kind of
because I think
traditions.
there was even like I mean I should know this for like anthropology and stuff like that, but it's been a minute since I've like read up on all the history. But I'm pretty sure there's a reason why those drums were eventually taken away,
right?
As a form of control, because it was like they didn't want people communicating with each other. Especially when it turns out that you actually could communicate with each other through the drums. So tabla is like a step away from that. It's like you can totally speak it and you can hear it. And yes, like you said, when you hear someone reciting it and then you hear it being played, it's really fun to have that kind of connection, because we don't necessarily get to hear that. Like if you have a full like a drum kit or something, if someone's on like an actual kit, you don't necessarily get to hear them saying all the sounds and then hear them play it. People can. Of course, you can get like beatboxing and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
But, that's just like one of the things that was built into the culture. But then the Sarod itself is a lead instrument in that regard. So generally what it'll be, unless it's like a duet with another... Well, it's kind of funny because they don't call it a duet, even though you're playing with a drummer. It'll be like you're a soloist, even though you have a drummer. And so there's like a whole long history of tabla kind of being looked down upon a little bit in that way. And I don't know if that's like a sort of ongoing remnant of that, where it's not considered like a duet, even though you're playing with another musician. They'll consider it like a duet or a jugalbandi. They'll also say if you have like sarod and sitar, or you'll have like violin and sitar, or violin and voice, this type of stuff, where it'll be like a duet now. But I don't know why it's not called a duet. I usually just think of it that way.
Is that like a Western? You think that's a Western artifact, or?
That's a great question. There's some pretty deep history where it goes into periods of time where the music, because especially in the north, you had obviously the massive Persian influence in the Mughal courts and things like that. There were periods of time where certain emperors basically called the music and dance forms and all these things haram. of basically being like of the devil, so to speak. And so the music was like frowned upon, and it was like basically kind of banished from the public spheres. Not even public spheres, just every sphere. And it was kept alive in sort of like the kind of courtesans, like sort of like the red light districts. Now there's obviously more information than I can like go into. Like, I'm not trying to give you like talk about.
No, I'm loving this. This
Okay,
is exactly what I want to talk about.
It's
really
crazy stuff.
fascinating.
Yeah. So basically, like the Baijis, which are like, and I don't want to be disrespectful. I'm forgetting exactly. I mean, it's like basically like a courtesan. It's like in the red light district. So this was where certain musical forms were kept alive. So you had people that were dancing, singing, playing tabla, sarangi. And then there was this crazy thing where, like, as the music, and I don't remember exactly how the transition happened, but once the music became, like, not haram again, it was kind of what do you say?
Accepted back.
Yeah, re-accepted into the actual,
court life.
Like, thank you for saying, that's exactly what I was trying to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
Thank you, you got me. Once it was, there was this sort of, like, way of looking down upon some of those instruments as if they were considered like lower because they were in like the red light districts at that time, which doesn't really make any sense because you're like, well, dude, like, first of all, that's that brings into a whole contemporary thing of looking at like sex work in the modern times and have it being condemned as like a negative versus looking at it from a different perspective. But we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But still, certain instruments were frowned upon. Like after that, they had this kind of air of like being, I guess it is, just being kind of considered lesser than some of the other instruments. And
was this all prior to like the British colonial era, the Raj era?
It's a really good question. If it ties into this, yes. My understanding is because of this certain period of time, it had to have happened before the British colonial period. Because this was still during the Mughal Empire, but like now my history here is getting a little blurry here. I'm not exactly sure when this happened. I just know that there were whole periods that my dad used to talk about where the music almost disappeared for decades and decades and decades, and would have died if it wasn't kept alive for these certain groups of people who were continuing the whole practice of it all.
Which in these days, like the way that culture shifted, I think it actually makes. It gives the music an additional level of clout or, sexiness or mystique, intrigue, that like, it's like because I had this question for you, as we were talking earlier, and I think this is a good time to go into it. But like, I was just curious, this tradition of classical Indian music, traditionally, was it did it live, was it like court music versus like folk music? And it sounds like what you're saying is that it's kind of woven through both, it's lived in both communities through the history of it, or am I getting that wrong? I don't know.
No, you're right. I mean, the thing is, it's like, if you go back to through the mythology of the music, there's one idea is that it comes from the divine. So it was like passed down from basically the divine into these sages of like, thousands of years ago, who then basically transmitted it to the rest of the people. So the idea is that these ragas, like our form of music that we play and sing, has existed basically time immemorial. It's frequencies that have existed through time and space. And so it gets pretty esoteric once you start looking at it that way, that it's like all melodies have always existed.
Right.
And then it gets passed down from the divine to people who then pass it on and on and on and on. It goes like this way. But then if you're looking at it more just like historically and from what there are records of and what you can see with people, you had like folk melodies that people would have been singing and playing forever. And then some of those get brought into a classical system, which was very much within the courts. So that's one of the interesting things with kind of the British Raj, like with the colonial period, is that the music went from in the early 40s, what is it, 43 or 45 when the independence was? Basically, at that point is when the music, as far as my understanding goes, that the music starts to shift from outside of specifically in the kind of royal sphere to getting put back out to the people. It's not that people couldn't hear it in other places. It's just that it was like that's where the music, the highest caliber of it was sort of kept. in the classical system. And so then there was kind of almost this sort of relearning of it into the public spheres as the music starts to transmit out into the public again. And it's crazy. It's like there's this whole cutthroat aspect of it from back in the day where it was like this was your livelihood. So if you took on a disciple, you would save the real jewels of the music for like your blood kin, or maybe the best of your disciples. But the idea was that you didn't want to lose your position in the court, because if you did, that was your livelihood.
Right.
So you have all these crazy stories of people trying to like steal other people's compositions and somebody's song or somebody's understanding of a raga, trying to like trick them into giving it to you or finding ways of getting it. And anyway, to go, I'm tangents upon tangents,
That's what this art form is all about, the tangents,
It did go through the folk and classical system. There's a bunch of classical ragas that like you'll play in like a classical development. And I understand that may not make any sense, the difference between like a folk development or a classical one. But basically like there were these old melodies that were taken up that could have been like lullabies. There's one like in particular called Rag Pilu, which is a lullaby that used to be sung as a lullaby, but then it got brought into like the classical system, and it's just kind of spread all over the place, and now is a fully like classically treated raga. But it has folk origins. There's a lot of ragas that potentially have this. Like and then of course it's really hard because some of these things are like thousands of years old. Yeah. Some of them are hundreds of years old. And then things change over time, and then, it's kind of like language in that way. So sometimes you're not even sure if the rag that we know as, well, when we think of a certain rag like today, is that what they were singing 500 years ago? Was it any different? In some cases, we have records where like notes shifted, and you're like, dude, that's crazy. So the version that we sing, and people are like, this is the way you do it. It's like, well, if you go back like 400 years or something, that is not the way you did it. Right. And then it enters into this whole realm of like, in conversation of like authenticity, really rigorous training, and people are so diehard and such sticklers for playing everything perfect. And it's like, well, dang, but what if the version that we're playing isn't even the right version?
and who has the authority to say that it is?
Yeah, and then it's also like India is so massive that you have this like almost like we jokingly will call it like raga telephone, where it's like one dude played it, one like master had the melody like pretty locked in, we'll say, has some disciples who learn it, and then maybe they learned a little bit, maybe they learned a lot. They go off to some other part of India and they start playing it, and other people hear that version of it. And then you're just like, man, like, so now you have all these different forms, and this is kind of how the styles sort of originated, these different schools or gharanas, like I was saying. And so you'll have like, each gharana might have a completely different take on the same rag. It might have the same basis, but it's kind of like language in that way, where there'll be like different dialects. There could be different slang. There could be different ways of, in the case of the music, it's like how you even express how the melody might sound. And yeah, dude, it's pretty fascinating.
It's interesting. I see so many parallels like with jazz. Yeah. When you think about, you have this kind of unity of classical trained composers in the quote unquote court of the time, and the folk blues musicians, blending their music together, and jazz being birthed out of that and being considered kind of like jazz was like the music they played in the red light districts. And now like it's become so legitimized as that, like, you go to like the fancy elite cocktail party and they have a jazz band. Right. And I know my brother, like going to school, in the East Bay, had a lot of feelings come up being in like an institutional art school that was teaching a tradition that he also at the same time felt was like so removed from the character of the innovators themselves who created the form. Like, can you take like the jazz player can you take the player out of the art form without the art form like losing its tie to like the human aspect, or he's waxed along about these topics, but I'm seeing as you talk about it, there's like, I think that's an interesting case study into the mass psychology and the anthropology of like how music moves through culture, how it shifts from, we're seeing it with hip hop, right? When we grew up, hip hop was still kind of fringe and edgy, and like, it was like something that old folks would like cross their arms about and be like, this is noise.
Yeah, well, they'd be like, oh, that gangster rap.
Right.
Yeah.
And now look at it. It's in everything. Every commercial has a trap beat. It's become such, it's kind of like the monoculture sound of the American identity in a lot of ways, whereas rock and roll was once filled that spot. And so it's cool to hear to hear this kind of similar pattern that is taking place over centuries rather than decades, and to see some of the similarities, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I think that's like one of the most, that's one of the reasons why I even liked anthropology. Well, it's not one of the reasons. It's probably the reason why I liked anthropology so much growing up, was just that it's all the things that connect us, and like how I like knowing how they came about, why they are the way that they are. So with Indian classical, yeah, it's like, and then also growing up next to, with my father being one of the greatest sources in the music like ever, it was kind of nuts because we just had access to just this tremendous amount of information. And
can you explain just who your father was? Also, I feel like we got to give some context.
Oh, yeah, sure. So my father, yeah, no problem. His name is, Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, although he didn't prefer the term Ustad, which is one of the ways that we say master. He preferred maestro. His father was an Ustad, and he said he never felt, if his father was an Ustad, then, how could he be? But my dad learned from my grandfather, so it's kind of this kind of tag team, we'll say. My grandfather, Baba Acharya Alauddin Khan Sahib, is considered to be potentially the most influential figure of Indian classical music, Hindustani classical music, in the last century, which is pretty insane considering we've already talked about how long this music goes back, how ancient it is, and just what he managed to do as far as kind of piecing a lot of things together and bringing new, or kind of the way that he opened up a lot of the ways you would hear the music, especially in instrumental. But he was just this absolutely brilliant, like, monster of a musician. And then he trained my father in this music as well, and my aunt, and many beautiful Indian classical musicians. Some of the best ever were trained by my grandfather. So then fast forward to my father, Maestro Ali Akbar Khan. He's just this stalwart figure. He came to the States first back in the mid-50s in 55, but he recorded the first LP of Indian classical music ever, and then really helped him, Ravi Shankar, Ravi rather, and a number of others really helped to push Indian classical music from India to everywhere else, essentially. Okay. That's kind of him in a nutshell. And then he was just this brilliant musician. It's one of those things that the older I get and the more I learn and the better I get in my craft and in this music, the more just mind-blowing my dad is, dude. I'm just like, every time I hear him, it's just, I am never not just blown away by what he did. It's just because it's like the more nuance I understand, the more subtleties that I can see. It's just like, it's just mind-blowing every time, dude. Because it's not even just that it's like intellectually fascinating or crazy. It's that it's just like always moves me. And it's like, yes, he is my dad, and I loved him, and I love him, and I'm also biased on the sound of the Sarod because it's one of the dopest to me.
Was that his main instrument?
Yeah, that was his main one, and that's what he trained us on. But it's just everything together. His ideas, the amount of, like, just the spectrum of emotions he'd be able to take you, that he'd be able to, like, show you through the sound, and the kind of, like, journeys you would physically, mentally, emotionally go on in the music. And I think anybody who's connected to his music has had one of these experiences, and it's just super, super powerful. As I'm saying this, I notice the light is getting lower and lower in here. I don't know if that, do you need the lights on?
That's why I was moving around.
Got it. You're adjusting
adjusted to the best that I can, and we'll, if we need to turn these lights on at some point, we can do that. But yeah,
there is that light above. It'll bounce off this way. I don't know if it'll work for you, but
it's still looking pretty good now, but cool. I'll let you know when things get a little too dark. I listen to your dad's music almost every day because it's like on my, I have this one song, which I remember telling you years ago. I was like, Garden of Dreams, man.
Oh, yeah.
I love that song. And you're like, yeah, that's like his Western stuff or whatever, you know? Like, okay, cool. But no, I've like, you know, I started, I think, listening to your dad's music in my early 20s, like,
Cool.
and it became really like maybe this is sacrilegious, but like it was like very utilitarian for me.
Oh, that's not sacrilegious.
Like as I've gotten older, like music, because I come from a musical tradition as well,
Right,
and
of course.
background, and you know, for most of my life, it's been the most important art form to me, and I've noticed over the last few years, especially as I've gotten more into like podcasts and more in love, a lot of my like valuable listening time has gotten sucked in that direction. I've found that music in this epoch, in this era of my life, is taking on a really utilitarian quality. Like I'm listening to music for effect rather than as like a general experience.
Oh, it sounds pretty focused.
Yeah. And so like the classical Indian and, you know, I'm like both through my personal connection to you and your family, like, yeah, I'm going to listen to Ali Akbar Khan, you know,
cool.
like there's such a wide range to dive into, but this is like something I have like a personal connection to. And he's also, there's a reason why your dad is so celebrated. So, you know, it is like a music that to me is like very much about going into an altered state of consciousness. And like, when I do imbibe it, that's kind of like, I mean, it's not something I'm like holding on to or forcing, but it's like part of what the experience is about to me. Like that's how I kind of intake it. It's almost like this ceremonial experience of music, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, I mean that's the, you know, it's kind of crazy because I think anybody who resonates with music obviously has many experiences over their lifetime of listening to something and having whatever mood comes out of it, or it's like, you know, the experience of being in a sad state, you listen to a song that pumps you up and you're like, dude, let's go, versus like the opposite where you're like really happy, you put a sad song on and you're like, oh man, like I gotta sit for a bit. But how quick it can change your entire mood. And so my grandfather, his whole thing was that music is the quickest route to the divine. There's even like a saying, Nad Brahma, which is basically sound is divine or sound is God. But it's like, you know, whether or not you are religious or not, the idea is that it taps into a higher state of existence. And that sound is what can bring you there almost immediately. And that's one of those things that I think is pretty intuitive. A lot of people have had that experience. At least not, I mean, doesn't mean that we've all like reached enlightenment by hearing a song like, wow, I have awakened. But I mean, like, yeah, we've all felt different things. And so that's one of the major focuses of Indian classical, is to make you kind of feel that. And then, you know, for my dad, the thing that he was, so like a lot of the stuff that we say, it's just like we just keep referring back to like, oh yeah, our dad said this, our dad said that, but it's like his dad said that to him, and it's just this kind of unbroken lineage idea where it's like if you just keep going back generation to generation, you're just using this ancient knowledge, so to speak, and that's the word is just being transmitted down all these generations. Was
Sarod an instrument that made its way down the, like, was that the primary instrument of your grandfather and so on going back, or
it became it? So my grandfather's nuts. Like it's like as crazy as our dad was, and how beautiful of a musician he was. Crazy in a positive way, not like actually insane or anything. Yeah. Although you could use that word also.
He was a musician.
I know. I know. Yeah, there is all that too, and that doesn't. There's no. He had plenty to say on that, but he was like. Our grandfather basically took everything he ever learned in his life musically and tried to shape it all into the version of the Sarod that my dad played. And so my dad's whole upbringing was basically this mission of my grandfather to instill everything he had musically, every sound he could think of to make, every instrument he could play into the sound of the Sarod, and basically just sort of, that's why my dad practiced like 18 hours a day. It was like a form of child abuse, basically, because it was insane for like 20 years.
Your dad was your grandfather's great project?
Effectively, yeah. And it's kind of like, dude, I think of it almost like, you know, when they talk about a kid raised by wolves kind of thing, to see like how would they develop language without having language being spoken to them, right? Like would they act like Mowgli from the Jungle Book? How does it work, right? Yeah. So it's sort of like, yeah, my dad was sort of that experiment. Super unethical, but, you know, and like, you know, child protective services, all this kind of stuff. But, you know, But it was effective, man. I mean, my dad came out this massively brilliant person.
Yeah.
And, that's a whole other story.
How did he feel about that?
Well, that's the other story. So if you go on that, basically the craziest thing that I can kind of sum it up as is that, so my dad was 50 when his dad passed away, and this is 1972. And he said that after his dad died, he realized the gift that his dad had given him through the music, and then realized how much love that my grandfather actually was basically trying to just, instill inside him in every possible way. It was really hard, but the idea is that he said he fell in love with he fell in love with the music for like the first time in his 50s, which blows my mind, because if you hear all those recordings his entire life, imagine that, dude. It's like, imagine being 50 and literally the thing that you know more than anything in the world you didn't even necessarily love. It was just what you knew how to do more than anything. Yeah. And then coming to love it at that age. And
the journey begins.
Basically, yeah. And it's like, that just trips me out, because it also then was the fact that my dad managed to not be just this completely traumatized, broken person after that entire life of that. Mm-hmm. It's pretty powerful, dude. But then he realized how much his dad loved him, and I think that was his way, at least, of coming to terms with everything. And so, yeah, that's what happened to him. But you had asked about, what was my grandfather's main instrument. The first thing is that, like, his story is one of the craziest things. That's like, it's just when I think about that as my family, I'm like, oh yeah, like all this crazy stuff happened. And I'm like, dude, we have these journals, we know how it happened, firsthand accounts of all this crazy stuff from other family and members in India. It's like, he ran away when he was 8. He ran away from his home to study music, and it was because, like, well, this is like, dude, this should be a movie. It should be a movie. Someday, dude. Yeah, my family's worked. My mom and my brother have spent a lot of time, my sister, on like trying to develop, like, screenplays and what do you call it? Like a treatment for it and all this kind of stuff. And it's a great story. So I can't do anything, long story short, I suppose, when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Just tell it, dude. This is a container for just what you're doing. So.
You've had to remind me like 3 times of that, dude. All right, thanks. I feel secure.
Yeah, dude. We got all the time that my day's clear.
Cool.
We got all the time.
Talk.
Yeah, I'm just like, to me, this is one of the great, like, fountains of lore.
Dude, it's crazy
in
lore.
This part of the world, and like getting to grow up in Marin. I was, I've always been aware of like the hearsay around the Khan family, and I know that it's like a deep and very rich history. So for me, like, one of the things that this podcast is all about is I consider this like a place to store this information, right? Cool. So like the fact that you're willing to come on and like share this as much as you want to give me, dude, I'm on board. This is awesome. I'm super fascinated. I'm tuned in. So let's give me the legacy. What do we got here? What's the story all about?
Oh, well, that's very cool. So, dude, I mean, the thing is, it's like he grew up, and so basically he was a young boy, and so around, I don't remember exactly how old he was, whether he was like 6, 7, or 8, but 8's when he runs away. So before that, on his way to school, he kept stopping at this one temple where these people were singing as he was walking by. And eventually he heard them singing, and I don't know if it was one time or if it was over the course of time that he decided that he didn't need to go to school. He had to go listen to more of them singing. He would just stop going. He stops, he just goes and sits there and like all day sits while these people sing, and he was so just basically infatuated with it, and he was so drawn to it that he couldn't do anything else. Over some time passes, and the headmaster is like, hey, Aladdin wasn't coming to class. Like, where has he been? Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, we send him to school every day. So the family, like, I think my great grandfather follows him and finds him basically sitting at this temple listening. And he was like, oh man, okay. So he basically bans music from my grandfather and says, you have to focus on your studies.
Can I pause real quick?
Yeah.
So just for my own understanding, because I remember you saying that it's like this music goes back in your family like many generations. Was there like a misgeneration, or like was that chain broken somehow? Or
no, it's actually, I probably should have clarified it. It's like we always talk about it being broken down in the family, but what it is, it's like the musical family lineage has been basically unbroken. So in the bloodline, so I was saying how back in the day, people would like jealously guard all the secrets of the music, right? And so they would only give you the real jewels if you were blood related. And maybe if you were a really good disciple, they'd give you some of it, but they wouldn't give you everything because they didn't want their family to lose out on the potential patronage of the king or the queen, depending on where you were. So my grandfather ends up getting accepted as a disciple from this, one of the great legends of music, Muhammad Wazir Khan Sahib, and like, who was a Veena master. And Veena being this instrument here, which almost kind of looks like a sitar. Of course, you can't see this on the camera, but if you look at the goddess Saraswati, who is she is the basically goddess of music and knowledge this way, you'll see her holding an instrument. This is a Veena. It's an old style of instrument from India. But he learned from him and got accepted into the family. And so in that way, that's where the kind of like family lineage of music.
Yeah, gotcha. The chain of handing down the sacred knowledge.
Yes, but if I try to say that within like, so it's been in my family since 16th century, but let me explain all this other stuff. It takes a while and then it's like a tangent. So yeah, that's where it's been unbroken. So that actually goes back to this famous court of Emperor Akbar.
I want to get to that. I got another question that I have to ask you that just brought up, because to me it speaks to like when you're talking about this chain of unbroken, like the transfer of knowledge unbroken. Does that mean that what it speaks to me is it that the knowledge was transferred via like a close relationship between the teacher and student, and that's the chain that's going back. Because when we think about it in this country, right, like people learn music in so many different ways and contexts, and I just want to get like clear about what you're saying, because I think for a lot of people they might not understand what that means, that like this is like a direct hand down.
No, that's a really great point, because yes, I realize as I start talking, there's so much stuff that it's like you forget. It's like otherwise it's like I have like footnotes to what I'm saying here. In Indian culture, the relationship between teacher and disciple, or guru shishya, what they call it. So there's this concept called guru shishya parampara, and like this connection between the teacher and the disciple is one of the most important and sort of cherished connections you can have. Like, to call someone a guru is like basically creating a bond that transfers beyond time and space. It's not a life bond, it's a lifetimes bond. Like, you are connected to them now for potentially like eternity, where the guru and the disciple will always find each other again and again and again through the annals of time. It's like you just continue.
You're like part of the Dharma cycle together.
Yeah, basically you are like being connected to them. And so like the concept of being a guru is crazy, because like you are supposed to then become everything to this person beyond their parents, beyond even like a deity of sorts. You are like there to take care of them. So it's like if you become like a guru, like the concept of it is like basically taking this person and now you are responsible for them for like ever.
I'm glad you said that, because I've seen the discomfort on Indian people's face when you're like, "You're my guru," and you're like, "Whoa, no. Yeah, like, slow down, buddy."
Yeah, exactly. I know. It's like,
It's a very loaded term that I think like us Westerners don't always immediately grasp. Just how much meaning there is in that word.
Yeah. And then some people will like are really quick to claim that they are, and it's like the other thing is that like, well, I don't know if it's appropriate, but it's like basically just there's part of the word that also basically just means like fecal matter. So if you say it wrong, so a lot of people jokingly, it's a joke that like people will say. Well, now I was joking to you before about trying to be like respectful in the space of the school, but it's like if you say like guru, it's like basically saying like
hagu.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you know what's up. Yeah. So it's like that. So people will oftentimes say that, and it's like that's so it's like kind of like just it's a kind of a bastardization of the idea of guru, even so just saying of the word. So
it's become to be like a pejorative at times.
Yeah, and unintentionally so. And it's like, it's just kind of funny because some people will just like really quick to claim guru. And it's like, it's almost like one of those, like, that's almost like a nice solid red flag to have. If someone's like, I'll be a guru. It's like, nope, that's not the person that you want.
Totally.
I know that's potentially contentious. So shout out to any of you who.
But that's kind of part of, isn't part of the tradition that like, and correct me if I'm totally
off base.
Off base.
How dare you, sir?
How dare I? But isn't like part of the traditional, I think this is cross-cultural, but like the teacher disciple story is that like you have to prove to the teacher that you're worthy of the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Like a guru's going to like reject you a couple of times probably, or at least make it you're not going to get a yes right at the gate unless it's some amazing connection or something, right?
Yeah. And actually that goes back to my grandfather, who ended up spending years trying to get his main guru, this Muhammad Wazir Khan Sahib, this guy, to accept him as his disciple. It's crazy. It's actually where my name comes from. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff in there. But like, so if we cycle back here, so the teacher and disciple, very important. That's a really important connection. So when you form a bond that way, it's, just a really powerful one for you to have. And it's really powerful in Indian culture as a whole. But then, that's then ties back to that's where the family lineage comes down. So once he was connected, that's where we have this sort of unbroken chain that goes back and back to the 16th century. And then the idea beyond that is that when you play, you're supposed to effectively, well, the way that we were trained at least, is when you sit down and you're about to play a raga, which is, the melodic form that we're going to be, playing within.
I want
to dive a bit into
that. I want to also light you a little bit better. So
as
will you keep talking?
Okay. There is a light right
audience.
behind you.
There's going to be some light changes, but will you just talk? You can talk either, just into my backdrop or whatever. Pretend I'm still here, but give us all. Can you give us like a definition of a raga? What is a raga?
Yeah. There's also a light right behind the tapestry if you want to use these ones. Yeah, so, raga, it's a huge concept, but the idea is that you can look at it as kind of a framework of a melody, and, or rather, the raga is the melody, and it's constructed of, a musical scale, certain particular notes, and then beyond the notes that are used, there's going to be certain emotions that are sort of ascribed to that raga. So there's kind of a sort of series of emotions that kind of sum up the human experience, and it's not exhaustive, but in Indian classical, some of the kind of ones are like peace, devotion, joy, detachment, heroism, and things like this. It kind of goes on. And then there's a few other ones in dance as well that they'll depict in physical kind of expression, but for melodic expression, these are the kind of emotions that we associate with any given rag. You could use all of them potentially, but most rags will have a number of them, and that's what kind of focuses on them. So you have this scale of notes, and then it's about how you bring out these emotions through the use of those notes, and that's what kind of makes up a raga. The other way that people say it is kind of like, one of the coolest ones I've heard is that it translates to that which colors the mind. So that concept of like, you hear a melody and it, instills these colors. I feel like I keep using the word instill, but it kind of covers you in this kind of color, so to speak, in your brain. And those feelings, that's kind of what a raga does. It elicits certain emotional responses.
So it's like a collection of feelings manifest in sound?
That's a very dope way of putting it, yeah. And so you have like, because there's only so many notes, and that's like one of the things. Indian classical shares the same scale as Western classical as well, so you still have the 12 kind of main notes. Basically like the solfege, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do of Western music. We use one called sargam, which is actually kind of sounds a little similar, but it's sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa. And the thing is, instead of using like A, B, C, D, E, F, G as like our key structure, we think of it as sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa. You still play within a certain key, but it's like if you pick, let's say, for example, the key of C, you stay there. That's where your sa is set. If I was singing in B or playing in B, my sa is set. And then I won't switch. I won't change keys at any point while I'm playing. I might change the raga, which has different notes, but I'm only playing within that fixed rag. So, yeah, I like how you phrased it. That's a really nice way of putting it as well. That's a nice summed up way. But yeah, That's what a raga is. It's one of those where it's like it's really hard to kind of articulate.
Yeah.
Tons of people try. It's sort of like you can get really heady and clinical, but it's like then you just have to hear it. Oh yeah, the point I was trying to say though with the 12 notes is that there are only so many notes that we have, and we share these. But then it's like, how many combinations of these notes can you make? And how many of these... See, the thing is then Indian music gets beyond the 12 notes, and we work on like quarter tones effectively, but we call them shrutis. They're notes that are in between the notes, but you don't exactly play them like a quarter tone as like an individual pitch that you don't just sit there generally on it. You'll slide through it, and it's that sliding, what we call ondolan, is how we start to express these other aspects of the melody lines that bring out these other emotions in different detail. And so you can have rags that have the exact same notes, but it's based on the way that you're sliding into the notes and the way that you're moving around those notes that create a different raga completely. And
yeah, that leads to my next question,
Sure.
which is how does improvisation factor in?
Yeah, so then that's the other thing. It's like you learn this structure. So the raga has rules. Oftentimes, I swear, it really feels like the more and more I think about it, the more similarities I find to... There's a lot of parallels to language.
Yeah.
There's grammar and syntax, and it's like you have to learn the structure of the raga, the way that it moves. So it's not just that there's certain notes. I wish if I had my Sarod, it'd be so much easier to explain because you start explaining music through words, and it's kind of like, cool, dude. But then you hear it.
Do you want to grab it? Is it hit?
I didn't bring it,
Okay.
dude. I was
all
like,
good.
I almost meant to hit you up and be like,
Yeah.
should I bring it?
Always, but no, it's all good.
All right.
We can do a part 2, you know?
Yeah. But I mean, in short, the idea is that it's like there's structure and rules you have to follow, and then at first you can feel kind of almost like restrictive because it's so strict. Like you can't break those rules. You're not supposed to. As soon as you do, you might enter into the kind of territory of a different melody, a different raga. And now you've changed the raga and you've ruined the mood of the first one, and in the kind of...
Killed the vibe, bro.
That's effectively it. So it's like once you kill the vibe, it's gone. And that actually becomes like, I think, one of the best ways of looking at the music. It's like, did you kill the vibe by kind of going out a little bit? And if you did, it was a big no-no. If you don't kill the vibe and it still feels like the rag, then... did you break it? Like, did you really break the rules? And that's where it becomes this whole like kind of subjective thing.
Yeah,
but then there's this like massive objectivity of the masters who were like the ones who were like would sit there in the front row watching you as you played or sang. And if you played it wrong, they're just like, cut, like you're out. And then you'd be kicked off the stage effectively. And then until you couldn't come back until you like went and trained more.
Right.
And that's when I said to you before that like a lot of times a lot of people wouldn't even start performing until they were like seasoned, like in their 30s and 40s. And that's like not the way that we grew up thinking of music.
No.
You're like, you get out there banging on your guitar when you're a kid. And you're
Totally.
like, it's like whether or not you're just playing like super raw, and it's like this is like going on like a pure punk vibe, and you're just like anything goes. And
I remember sitting in front of the Fairfax Pavilion with you like 10 years ago, and you were doing some sort of lesson lecture demo, and I remember talking to you about it because, you know, we grew up in the same community, and I knew that like your brother, you would come and do demos. It's for our school.
Right.
I like had never experienced you playing the music, and so I remember asking you like something about your music journey, or you know, is this like a new thing that you're just getting into? And I think that you did say something to me about like, yeah, like, you know, like my family won't. I'm not even allowed to like perform yet, or I'm like, you said something to that effect of like, you know, that it's. You're like, I'm just working on the ragas, man.
Yeah, there is like totally an aspect. Like I also came to it a little bit later than my brother Alam, and so it's like I started studying Sarod more seriously I wanted to study Sarod like actively when I was like 13.
Okay.
But like our dad had us study when we were younger, but I was saying like he was forced into it basically by his dad.
Right.
He didn't want us to have the same relationship because he didn't want us to wait till 50 to realize that we actually love him. That's crazy, dude.
Yeah,
so
totally.
you know, so he didn't force us, and he was like, if you come to it, it basically was like you have to come to it of your own free will and volition. If you choose it, great. If you don't, then it's sort of like c'est la vie. But at least we could still have a relationship. Alam went to it way younger, and I got more like it was after high school. It was actually when he got sick. So like I had been in college, and then I was around 18 when he became sick, and that's when I started to really like realize what I was missing. And then I knew that, you know, as he was getting because I've been taking classes like most of my life with him, and I've been studying and studying and studying, but it was just something that was part of my life, and it was something that I did, and it was this whole kind of music practice through osmosis as well, where he was like, look, if you're not actively like trying to be a performing musician, you just got to be immersed in it all the time. So it's like when you do decide, it's all sitting in there.
Yeah, the fluency exists.
Dude, now even still, I'll hear stuff from like, I'll hear something that, you know, was like when I was just a baby, and I'm like, oh, dude, I remember hearing that. What the heck? Like, it was just planted in there deep within
he was Mr. Miyagi-ing you.
Oh yeah. From like, he was smart, man. He knew what was up. He found ways to get it into your brain and into your heart without like, you know, beating you for it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so at that time, yeah, dude, because if that was at that thing you're talking about, my dad was still alive then, which was already, he died 13 years ago. So we're talking like, I mean, that would have been like maybe 15, 16, 17 years ago or something like that. That's crazy. That was a while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't, you know, at that point, I still wasn't performing. Yeah. And it's like when you perform at that point, it's like, you know, you take like a composition and it's like a fixed piece of music. And that's one of the ways that you would learn a raga. It's like you learn tons of compositions and you learn like themes. We call them guts, but they're like a theme or a chorus or like a refrain. It's kind of like that main melody that you keep coming back to.
Mm-hmm.
And so you learn these, and then you learn all of these compositions where it's just examples of how you would go from the beginning to the end of a piece of music, which composition.
Mm-hmm.
But it shows you the rules of how you can come up with lines, the different speeds in which you can make lines, the different rhythm cycles, because there's so many. There's your 4/4, which is our tintal, which is 16 beats, but then there's like rupak, which is 7, which is found throughout the world, but then there's like 10 beats, 14 beats, 12 beats, and it can be really fun. 6 beats, like 8.5, and weird tripped out tals where you're like, what? This is crazy. But you learn all these compositions to show you the rules and the ways you navigate it. So then once you do this synthesis of like, you learn the rules and the structures, now you have all these examples to use, and then you start constructing them yourself. And so it's like, you know, our dad would be like, are you really improvising though? The whole idea is that you've learned so much material that you can then create things on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
You're composing on the spot, but it's like with language. These words that we're saying, like the words that I'm speaking right now, the things you're saying, it's like we've learned these words through our lives. It's not like we had to learn the actual sentence that somebody said. You didn't hear the exact sentence that I'm saying right now, or I didn't hear it, so I could say it back to you. We're constructing them on the fly,
For sure.
but it's because we have so many examples.
Totally.
So then it's like, you know, are you coming up with anything like original and new? Because it's like if the words already existed, and you're just putting them in a certain order. The idea, I mean, with words, this is where kind of the analogy sort of falls apart because they're words and they have different meanings and things. But with like frequencies, the idea is that the vibrations exist in the universe all the time. So every possible combination of note frequency exists somewhere in time and space. So it's like, nothing new is being played. It's all just kind of capturing and sort of rediscovering sounds and putting them together.
Well,
so,
when you add the cycle of rebirth and reincarnation into that, you know, philosophy around music too, like, are you really learning anything new, or are you just remembering the things that were learned in previous lives?
That's
right?
tight. I don't think I've ever thought about it that way. That's cool.
If you think about the people that created the original pieces that you're playing, right? I think you could make the argument that for them that was how they believe that, right? So like that some of that philosophy has to be getting imbued into the music itself or into the tradition behind the creation of it.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. I mean, it's the way that my grandfather is, from what I heard from my dad, and the way that my dad taught it was that you have these fixed forms, and then once you have learned enough of the fixed forms, then it goes beyond just the fixed form. Then it goes beyond the feeling, and it's like, just because you're playing the line that has been fixed or something like that doesn't mean you actually are creating the mood that was there in the raga.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, so now you're improvising, so to speak, or my dad would refer to oftentimes as composing on the spot. but it's kind of like, because it wasn't just this free improvisation where you could kind of reach anywhere you wanted to go. It still was within this sort of sandbox, but it's just the idea is that like as you got more of a kind of mental and sort of emotional conception of what the raga is supposed to feel like and how it moves, the sandbox just gets bigger and bigger. And at that point, you know, it's a pretty expansive concept, but you're just you are free to explore within the confines of the rag that you find yourself in. And so
you got to learn the rules so that you know that you can break them intentionally, right?
Yeah, and it's like but then the concept becomes like, are you even breaking the rules if it still sounds like, yeah, if certain notes just all of a sudden appear that never are in the rag, it's like, dude, you don't do that. But most likely if you did that, you're probably making it not feel like the rag anymore. It feels like something else.
Yeah.
And so like that seems to be a pretty good little, you know, barometer, so to speak. It's like if the vibe feels the same or feels as the vibe should for the rag, that has been sort of unanimously agreed upon by the greatest maestros over the course of centuries, then it seems like more or less you're okay. It doesn't give you like carte blanche to just like play whatever you want. You can't just be like, oh yeah, like it feels like this because I think it feels this way. It's like, nah, dude, it's a really weird kind of space in that regard, because yeah, there is this objective concept of what the rag is supposed to be, but then there is also a subjective experience for how the rag feels like to you. And then to make it even more confusing, there's this idea that the rags are almost seen as entities, like individual beings. And so
do they change and evolve?
Yes, that's the idea. And they might be just as we change on the day to day, depending on where you are, depending on the time of day, not the time of day. Well, time of day is a whole other aspect of the music, but depending on the day, the rag might feel different. And so then your job as the artist is to like tap into your own mood, the mood of the audience or who you're about to play for, and then the mood of the raga as you sit down. And that's like some crazy stuff, because you're like, what? Like, you imagine that if like the piece, like you're like, yo, I have this song, but it changes every day, man, and I don't know what's coming out this time. But a lot of people do play that way, so it's actually not that, maybe it's not that strange.
Who gets to say what the rag feels like then?
The artist. But it's still, but it's still within like the realm of like this objective idea. Is that
part of the role of the master then, is to like kind of hold, you know, to like hold some form of objective quality about what these rag traditions are? Like,
oh, absolutely. I think so, because there's tons of times where you'd be like, you know, hey dad, I listened to this recording of you, or I was listening to this old concert, and you know, you play this one line in this particular rag. How did you make that work? Like, that's not, you didn't teach us to do it this way. Isn't that kind of outside the norm? And he's like, what? And so you're like, show it to him. And then it might be like, well, you don't understand the reason I did it that day. Or it's like, or it was just as simple as like, it was okay in that moment. And then you're just like, man, that is a really tricky kind of like just this weird balancing act while you're playing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like one of those where depending on who you talk to, they might feel really strict about certain rules. But then you listen to the greatest maestros play, all the masters, and you see them, they all have different feelings on things.
Right.
But then there's this weird thing where like you'll hear it, I don't know. It's like if you don't know what you're missing, and they do, then it's like it's easy for you to be like, that doesn't seem like it's right. And then it's like years pass or time passes, and then you realize, oh man, like I didn't even know that part was there. Right. And then it's like, well, damn, what else am I missing, dude? So it's like our dad would oftentimes, my brother does this all the time when he's teaching, and I love it. It's this idea like you're listening, and it's like as soon as you feel like you've heard as much as there, listen further, like go deeper into it. And then once you think you've heard all those things, it's like keep going, because you've basically surely missed something. And I don't know, it's like if you've ever felt this, it's like if you're playing a concert or something like that, or if you were like in a lesson and you think you're like you're playing back what like your teacher's showing to you, or you like really feel like you're playing the particular piece of music you're doing like well. And then you listen to a recording of it and you're like, damn, dude, like I didn't hear myself right. Like maybe the vibe was actually quite a bit different than I thought. Yeah. Or on the happy side is that it sounds better than you think it did. Oftentimes you're like, oh, dude,
usually
I'm messing
that's
this up.
The case for me.
Yeah. You're like, oh, dude, I'm playing like crap. Like it sucks, dude. And you're like trying not to get in your own head while you're playing, and you still have to focus on the concert.
Totally.
But then you hear a recording of it and you're like, damn, that actually wasn't that. What the hell was I hearing? Like, dude, where did I go with that?
For sure. How did your dad feel about mistakes? in performance?
Mm.
Do you have a philosophy about it?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like some consolidated one, or like one that he would use more often than the others. The thing that like was drilled into us and actually caused me, I think, a lot of like hardship musically in development was this concept of like, if it's not in tune and is not in rhythm, it's basically broken. It's not worth anything. And it was like, it has to be in tune. It has to be in rhythm. I think those are great standards. Mm-hmm. Play in tune, play in rhythm. It's like, dope. Yeah, that's great.
Fundamentals.
Yeah. The idea is that it's like, if you don't have those, then nothing else is worth talking about. So
what do you mean by in tune? Like actual, the instrument in tune, or in the actual scale? Or?
Everything. So like when you play a note, that the note is in tune itself. Like so the instrument's in tune, your intonation is correct. And then within the raga, that like the way that you're playing the note sounds like the way it should. But basically just as simple as being in tune, as far as we can understand intonation in music, and then in rhythm as far as we can understand rhythmic aspects, mm-hmm. But it's like, so then the thing is, what that does is that it's like the idea is that with Indian classical, it's not just a music for like helping you and helping others, but it's also this path of self-realization, and it's supposed to be I mean, one of the aspects of it, one of the major aspects, is that it's a way of worship to the divine. So again, like religious, I don't know if the religious part really matters. It's this idea of self-realization, trying to like ascend to another plane of existence through sound. But by doing it, it's like worshiping whatever power may be, and really trying to connect to that through your playing. And so when you're playing like a note, the note has to be as basically pure and as perfect as possible to try to get you to that place, to mm-hmm. like to be in a place of worship that feels like honorable enough for the divine. This idea of everything being basically perfect. So no issue, so like no mistake was accepted, basically. That's the idea. Obviously then we are infallible, we're human beings, so It's like we're gonna make mistakes, dude.
No, but that's I see what you're saying, because I've noticed this. I'm friends with, my buddies in the Honey Drops, right?
Yeah.
Amazing music. And I go to their shows, and what I've realized is that the level of craftsmanship is so high that there is a spell that's cast, right? Like when you're able to play at a certain level of consistency, there is a spell that is cast in the air where people are like emotionally so connected to the art, and a wrong note, a note of discord that's out of the feeling, like you're saying, can shatter that spell, where suddenly people are like, oh, look at the time, I gotta go. Or
Yeah.
Oh, it's the same in conversation, right? Like if we're in harmony in a conversation,
you're tapped in,
and suddenly the time
disappears.
It disappears. But then it can be something as simple as a text message, or and suddenly you're out, you're like, oh my god, like you're returned into a different state of thinking and being. And I think that like as musicians, like we're constantly making mistakes, we're constantly making errors, but what I'm trying to do right now is summarize so that I can see that I'm understanding what you're saying. But like by reaching for that divine, to create that connection to the divine, that feeling of transcendence, it's part of it is you getting used to making mistakes. You almost when you do make mistakes, you're almost making mistakes in the right way, or your mistakes become kind of more in tune as well, because you're reaching beyond, I think there's a way to fail better, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Fail upwards. Yeah. It's crazy, because it's like, clearly there are mistakes. I guess it keeps coming back to me. I think the deeper I get into this music, or just in art in general, it's like, because clearly there are people that will make the best, artists make mistakes. It's just something that does happen.
Some of the best musical ideas, or a lot of them, are mistakes, right?
That opens up a super interesting conversation, because like there's hella times where like I'll hear some recording of my dad, and some of the stuff that I like the most are these things that like were slightly out of the pocket. Like it wasn't something that maybe his finger slipped off the instrument or something, and then it creates this weird sort of sound because it like it strikes off, but then he maybe uses that as a launching platform for some really dope idea that like becomes some other crazy rhythmic thing. And that's the part where I think the mastery comes in for mistakes. It's like when the mistakes become another path to something better.
Yeah,
because they either like they adapt so quickly that it's like, or there even is stuff where it's like, you hear some old recording of somebody singing and their voice cracks, but there's something so raw about it that you're like, dude, it's almost like I would have liked it less if the voice never cracked.
Yeah.
Maybe if I heard the recording and it would never crack, you'd be like, dude, what? That was the most crazy vocal performance I'd ever heard.
I always reference like the old Bob Marley recordings from like Jamaica before he like hit huge. And some of those recordings, there's like all these like flat notes that he's hitting, or like you hear sometimes like one of the backup singers is a little out of pitch, but there's something about the style of music that they're making, or the way that it's recorded, like it's still in.
Right. It feels good.
Feels good. And it's like, I would prefer that to an auto-tuned, perfect in pitch, clean recording of the modern, that like these days, I think everyone's so focused on being in tune and everything's so like auto pitched and it's like too clean.
Yeah, it's too clean. Well, it loses the raw feeling. I think rawness is something that I always connect to, like no matter what the state is, basically. But yeah, the idea though with those types of like playing notes out of tune or having something hit flat, the idea is that this is supposed to be like ironed out of us completely. Like you don't do those things, and so that's what you're trying to reach towards. I think everybody is, but this idea that it's always as a way of purity to reach this higher power. And that's like at the crux of, I think, Indian classical music, at least Hindustani specifically. I'll say in our tradition, I can't speak for everybody because I'm sure there is a multitude of ways you could look at music. And this is only just one way. This was my grandfather, the way he was trained and what he understood, and then what he passed down to my father, to ourselves. And it's like ourselves being my family and all the disciples. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of hectic. I mean, like that. So I'm trying to think. You asked, like, does he have a piece of wisdom on on that kind of stuff, mistakes? And I'm trying to think of anything he said, like verbatim, that always connected. But it was more the way that he took mistakes and used it into something else. And I think that's where, like, also if you bring back parallels to jazz music, it's like, dude, there's so much stuff that comes out of, like, discordancy in some ways. Like, discordancy, is that a word? Something being discordant in another word?
Kind of like dissonance, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, dissonance would probably be the better one. Having some form, because, like, dissonance isn't necessarily, like, a negative thing.
No, it's just, like, a different color to paint with, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can have contrasting aspects. So it's, like, there's things that... I'm trying to think about, words that my dad actually said in regards to this. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head that's coming out other than like, he used lots of analogies, and he would always use basically pictures. So there was always like metaphor and analogy and simile. Like those were his ways. Granted, English wasn't also his first language. He spoke quite a few of them, but I think it's one of the best ways of expressing in a language is because if you can't find the words to exactly say or articulate what you want, you just use an image, and then people are like, oh dude, yeah, I totally get you.
Yeah, totally.
So he'd say things like, when you have like a certain note that's out of tune, it would be like a nice fresh pot of milk, and then a fly like lands right on it, and you just watch it land right in it, and you're like, dude, like I can still drink it, but like I feel a little funny now because like that, or like a beautiful white dress, and there's like just one brown stain, and you're like, bummer. Like it kind of takes your eye, and sort of that's what you focus on.
You got to tie dye the dress.
Yeah. Well, see, then that's turning the mistake into something else, right? Then all of a sudden you've turned it into something else. Yeah, there's like some of my favorite stuff my dad does. Well, there's a style or a form of. What do you say? There's a thing called tihai in music, or tihai you'll hear, but tihai where it's a...
No,
Yeah, tihai. Yeah, it's not that anymore though, dude. I actually don't know. I don't know what they're saying is. Is it a-hi?
I have no idea.
Hey, Will. I don't know, Williams? I'm not sure. Our old high school, it was Drake High, D High, but it switched to Archie Williams after a very contentious battle for the names.
Yes.
Long story short.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, but our old shout outs, dude. Cheers, man. Yeah. I know. T-high.
Yeah,
T-I-H-A-I. But that's funny. Dude. I never thought about it that way. You've hit me with a couple of these where I'm like, dude, I've never thought about that before. That's dope. Thank you for these. So T-high is something that repeats 3 times. So da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. And it's a musical device that will get you back to the 1 generally, but it could get you anywhere to the halfway point in a cycle. Because Indian classical kind of, well, we're getting into like all the deep stuff about the cycles of the music or the way that it functions. But like the 1 in Indian classical is really, really important. But also, so is like the 9 for 16 beats, the 1 and the halfway point. But it's kind of like, it's not just like this cycle that is repeating, and you're like, as long as you're in the pocket, you're cool. Everything kind of has to function around this idea of getting back to the 1 effectively. So a lot of themes, or what we call a gut, will start like on the 13th beat, or it'll start on the 9th beat, and then end on the 1. It's like that's where the beginning is. So when you're soloing and when you're playing, the idea is to get back to where this gut comes, or to get back to the 1, and that's where kind of everything resolves back to. You can get really into cool stuff where you resolve on other notes and then find or other beats and get somewhere else, but T-highs are a really cool way of getting you back to get back to the 1. And oh bro, dude, why was I even talking about this?
It's all we got into
This was the
mistakes.
D-high.
No, but
talking about T-high?
I did it, hearing you talk about like this music and your father's attitude towards it. I wanted to ask you, like, in the tradition, like the traditional understanding of this kind of music, like, is there such a thing? Like, is it meant to ever be listened to casually?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Because I feel like so much of what you said, it leads me to believe that you're like seeking this profound experience. I know when I've come and seen shows here, it's like been a different. Like, it's not like listening to a song on the radio. It's like I'm coming here.
Experience.
The song, it's like a couple hour. The songs are 10 or a half an hour long, and it's a journey, and it's really dope. But it takes a lot of energy to go through, and it's like if I wake up and I'm making some coffee or something, like
to put on a recording might not.
I'm just wondering, like, is like how it's used in more informal settings, or how you think about that in those regards.
Yeah, context. Absolutely. I did remember what I was trying to say. So before I forget, just to finish my whole thing, some of my favorite things is that he'll do a T-high, and if the T-high doesn't work, because he wouldn't fix anything, everything was really off the cuff when he would play, and that's the way that my older brother and I in particular like really trained. A lot of the disciples train this way. You don't fix stuff. So it's like high risk, high reward in some regards, but he'll use these things where if the T-high doesn't work, he'll take these mistakes and then turn them into something else. So there's tons of recordings where he misses one, but then because he missed that, he turns it into a different rhythm, which ends up in this like crazy way of getting back to some. So when you finish it, it's just this feeling of like, wow, and like, aha, and just, but it wouldn't have happened if he had made it the first time. So it's almost like the mistake makes the music better. But mistake is kind of a loose term. So anyway, as far as what you just said though, wait, I had it and now I'm dude, I'm getting.
No, I mean, just to tag on what you were saying, it's kind of like, what is it, Miles Davis or Charlie Parker, who says like, if you play a wrong note, play it 3 more times. It'll get right, you know? But, no, what I was saying is like, I was asking you, you know.
Oh, can you listen to it casually?
Yeah. What are the casual applications of Indian classical music? Yeah.
It's music. So in that regard, like, it's like, because like the thing is, when it was in the court system, it was also a casual music. It doesn't, I mean, not only, but it could have been like when my dad was a court musician. I don't know if you knew this, for the Maharaja of Jodhpur.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So when he was like in his early 20s, he basically was the court musician for this king, kind of at the end period of the British colonial period. And he had to play for like 8 hours a day every day, and the king, queens, princesses, princes, anybody dignitaries, he was just on call. So whenever they wanted music, he would come and play. And so that's just an example of like, you know, they would do it while they were having food. They would have it while they were having, you know, meetings, while they were just enjoying conversation casually, if they wanted to have a focused listening session. So the music, it's like it's there for you as just a music. I think the bigger idea, even if it's not casual or beyond the casual conversation, is just the time of day. That's the thing. That's one of the aspects of Indian classical that I think is probably one of the most beautiful aspects of it, one of the coolest aspects, is that it's based on the time of day. At least there's certain families who focus on this more, and our family definitely are pretty big sticklers about it. But in the Hindustani classical system, there are more focused on the times of day. In the Carnatic system, they've kind of done away with it a little bit. But there's a really cool history with the music being associated with rituals and certain ceremonies that were also based on the time of day, as far as I understand. So then you can get this kind of ritualistic sort of context of why certain melodies were played at those times of day. Ragams in their case, but in our case, the rags, or raga, yeah, it's the time of day. So you'll have morning ragas, you'll have afternoon ragas, evening ragas, late evening, late morning, late afternoon, sunset.
Overnight.
Yeah, you have all
late night
ragas.
ragas.
Yeah, there's late night ragas, there's late night ragas, pre-dawn, seasonal ragas, and there's thousands and thousands of them altogether. I think my dad said there's like possible note combinations is like 75,000 different permutations of ragas. That's insane, dude.
Yeah.
So, in each one of them, he said, like, ideally you're supposed to learn like 500 compositions in like each one. That was one of the old school ideas, to really get it into your heart and mind. So 75,000 times 500. It's kind of crazy, dude.
Yeah. How many ragas did he claim to?
No. I don't know. He said his dad knew I've even heard him say he knew everything basically.
Yeah.
But my grandfather was this insane genius. My dad, I don't know. He knew hundreds. That's the thing. And it's also he knew potentially thousands of them. He taught something I think through the history of the school, over 40 years, he taught something like 400-ish different ones, unique ones, which is pretty crazy. And then he taught tons of compositions and a lot of them. So it's a lot of music. But if you look at his actual repertoire, I'm not sure how many. But the idea being that whether or not you're listening to it casually, listening to it almost in that beyond passive, where it's or it is completely passive. You're making food, you're just doing something, it's in the background, you're going about with your day. Then I think there's you have it on and you're kind of sitting down and you're I'm gonna listen to some music and just kind of do whatever you're doing, but you're kind of listening. Then it goes onto this whole spectrum of are you actively studying it? And it's what are you looking for? Are you listening to how they're going through the raga? Are you breaking down each individual line? Are you looking at the notes that they use? Whereas are you trying to look at the kind of overarching theme of how they're moving through the melody? All that to say, I feel like it's the time of day that really is the kind of the ticket. It's if you're listening passively, totally cool. Just listen to a morning raga if it's in the morning.
Gotcha.
The whole idea is that it's the ragas will have more or less potency. The notes will have more or less potency based on the time of day. There's lots of superstition. The worst cases, there's one called incarnation, which is a really powerful rag that a lot of people will learn first. Kalyan. In our family, we play a version of it called incarnation or Yaman Kalyan, and which Yemen, there's potentially folklore that it actually comes from Yemen, that it was transferred over. So it's kind of cool. But there's this. So you have a rag potentially from another country that is one of the major ragas in the Indian system. Pretty interesting to me. But we don't know. That's just one of the potentials. But so this rag, if it's a nighttime raga, if you play it during the day or out of time, my dad would say that the folklore is that your family will die.
Oh shit!
So you're what? I don't even want to mess with that, dude. That's like Candyman or totally. or Bloody Mary. All these things. You're you can do it, but
you want to take the chance?
I don't want to mess with that stuff, dude. I don't want to welcome that juju. It's don't you put that what is it that on me, Ricky Bobby?
Yeah, exactly, dude.
So it's then you have the idea of just that it just doesn't feel as good, that you're just kind of missing out on the potency. That's probably the sweetest way of looking at it. You could listen to the ragas at the wrong time of day, but it's one of those if you didn't know, does it have the same is it so where is the
how
kind
much
of
is it being put on you and how much of it is inherent to the music? And
then once you know, is it because once you know, you can't turn it off, man.
Right?
So it's do you want to go? It's
you
Matrix
feel
style.
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now it's at a point where it's I can you put a rag that I don't know, potentially never heard, and it's more or less you hear it and you're oh yeah, I can feel that this is either morning, late afternoon, evening, but it'll have to do with what notes are being played, how the notes are being played.
Yeah.
And that, so there's a bunch of stuff that will then go into how I would think about what the melody is. What does it sound like? Because again, they share so many similarities with other ragas. You have to learn other ones, so you know what not to play.
So basically, like, you've put your eggs over easy on top of the rice. There's no going back.
Yeah, dude. It's the best. It's the best. Yeah, once you've opened that, like, sweet Pandora's box, like, yeah, you can't really close it.
Dude, that's awesome. That's lovely. Well, dude, we're like we just hit 2 hours right there.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah, that's the time warp, dude.
Man.
Which is that's what we just did a ROG, right? This is like, like I was just saying, that's what I love about this medium. But so I think, like, we're getting to our limit, thinking about your time and my time. I do feel like for the audience out there, we gotta, like, finish this story about your grandpa, because there was such a good tease and we got, like, the first chapter.
Yeah.
I also know that you were trying to end around 5. It's like 5:46, 5:45. So I want to be cognizant of that. I definitely, like, we didn't even, like, get to the history of the school or any of this other things. More to come, hopefully, in the future.
Yeah.
But I was thinking maybe, if possible, we could end with
the story.
And, that can be, like, a nice resolution to this beautiful conversation.
Yeah, thanks, bro. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Okay, we'll do the little summary. The school started in the late 60s. It is going on still for 50 plus years. We are still an active institution for Indian classical music. If you want to study Indian classical music, just come check us out. We are the Ali Akbar College of Music, aacm.org. You can also look up my dad, Ali Akbar Khan, aliakbarkhan.com. Tons of music. We actually have he just turned 100 this year, or he would have.
Yeah.
We put together a 24-hour playlist of music of just his that is time-based. So I was just talking about the time.
I need this.
Bro, it's on aliakbarkhan.com.
Okay.
It's called Raga Radio. You just go to it. We did it so it's based on from, like, I think it starts at 5:30 in the morning, and then you can choose whatever rag is closest to your time. You'll see where it fits within the 24 hours. You just press play. And then you don't have to think about it. You just go to the time of day that you're at, press play, and then it'll just go.
Is it a constant stream going?
Yeah. So we have it be that you started it when you
started
do it.
The song. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So that's there. My dad, we keep the music going. The school is here. We still teach. You want any more information, hit us up.
Mm-hmm.
That's the spiel. And we're still going strong. And
you're teaching as well.
Yeah, teaching. And my family runs the school. It's our mom. She's the director. My older brother, Alam, he's the head of instrumental music. Myself, our younger sister, Medina. And then Pandit Shapan Chaudhry. He's one of the best musicians on the planet. And he is our tabla master who has been teaching here for, 40 years now?
Swapan's still going strong?
Dude, he's still going strong. And he's better than ever. Dude is a monster. It's one of those things where it's like when you look at mastery, it trips me out because it's like you usually expect someone to get, like, older and there's physical parts that slow down. That's just what happens. But you get smarter and wiser and you learn more. I don't know what it is about him though. It just seems like he just keeps getting. It seems like his abilities don't diminish, yet he just keeps getting stronger. So you're like, what elven sorcery is this, dude? Like. Dude, crazy stuff.
The Chaudhurys are a special group.
Yeah,
I feel the same way about Nilan, though. It's like I see him, I see the time lapses in between seeing him. I see him every couple of years, and I'm like, you got some elfin blood in you, dude.
Yeah. Well, Nilan, he's dope. He's a very good musician, and
and you guys have played together a lot, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I grew up with Nilan. He's him and Ishan and their whole family. I mean, it's just like my dad considered Chopin like a son and a brother. And then for Shapanji, it's like a dad and a brother. And so for me, it was always like, I was like, what are you? My uncle, older brother? And it's kind of like all of it. It's just family at that point. Totally. So Nilan, Ishan, it's like we're just all family.
I love it.
Jane and everybody. Love him. So sweet stuff there. My grandfather was 8 when he runs away. He got banished from playing music. So he's like, I have to study music. So he basically gets together a little bag of things, some money, some clothes, some food. He hops on a train. He's 8, right?
Where was he at this time in India?
So in this point, he was in Bangladesh.
Okay.
What is Bangladesh?
Yeah.
So
at that time, was it part of?
Yes, before it had been separated. Yeah. And my dad grew up in Shivpur, Bangladesh. Where is my dad from? Tripura? I'm losing my family. I'm talking too much, dude.
It's all good.
We'll just say he was not where he was.
Yeah.
And then he catches a train. He hops on one. Doesn't know you need a ticket. Nobody stops him. I don't know how all this stuff happens, right? Causality, fate, whatever you want to call it. World is crazy. So he hops on a train. No one stops. This 8-year-old kid. He takes a train and he ends up in Kolkata. Whereas I believe Kolkata is where he goes first. I don't know if he knew he was going to Kolkata. I don't know why he just hopped on the train. He gets there. Doesn't know anybody. He's 8. So he found a place to sleep. Somebody steals his belongings the first night. So now he is a kid, has no idea where he is, has no money, no food, nothing, and is just on the streets. And all he wanted to do was to find a music teacher. And so eventually, and this is just crazy stuff. I was in India a couple years ago. Let me go back. He finds a house and he basically is laying down because he's so exhausted. This dude opens the door, sees this little boy sitting outside, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And the guy's like, "I just need some water. I'm basically lost. I don't have anything." The guy brings him in, gives him water, and eventually connects him to his first music teacher. I was playing a show in India in 2019, and this older man comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, we're very closely related." And I was like, "Oh, like we're family? Like, cool, man." He's like, "No, my grandfather is the man who opened the door for your grandfather."
Whoa.
And I was like, "Wait, what?" And I was like, "Dude, your grandfather is the reason I exist, man. Like, are you serious?"
Yeah.
It's just like, it was one of the cooler experiences in my life. I was just like, that's crazy. Because without this guy, I don't know what would have happened.
Right. Yeah.
So he meets a teacher, and he studies vocal music for like 6 years with this guy, and it's like super serious, rigorous training, only vocal technique, like not really focusing on songs and compositions, just strengthening the body. And he practices crazy hard for all these years, and so I think at this point he's like 14, 15. He becomes like a total badass at vocal music because he's been only doing strength training. He's just like,
So
and he's
breathing techniques,
vocal techniques, tons of patterns. So he's basically, the idea was that to train your mind and body to hear every possible like note permutation and things. So when you start learning compositions and different ragas and different patterns, you've already sung them and you just latch onto them and you can just basically glob it in.
You've already embodied it.
Yeah, because the music, again, at this time was still not written down. It was an oral and an oral tradition. It was only by ear.
Wow.
So everything was transmitted that way. And that's why songs are so important, because they're one of the best tools to transmit information, right?
Totally.
Then this guy, once he starts getting enough to do more with the musical training, he passes away. The teacher does, unfortunately. And so now he's like really strong and really good at what he does, but he still needs more teachers. And so he ends up getting like a violin instructor. And I don't know if he learned violin at some point, but he ends up getting involved with like a troupe of musicians for performances. And the cycle just kind of continues, where he basically just keeps meeting these people and absorbing as much possible information as he can.
Do you know what time historically this is?
Yeah. So this would have been the late 1800s at this point, because my grandfather was born, the birth records are a little mixed up, but either he was born somewhere between 1862 and around 1881.
Wow. Okay.
Which is my grandfather, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy, dude.
Yeah.
So it's a long time here. So at this point, most likely it was like the late 1800s. It was somewhere in the 70s, or it was somewhere in the 80s, or potentially somewhere in the 90s. We don't know. The records are kind of funny. But yeah, so fast forward all this stuff, he basically just keeps going from teacher to teacher to teacher to teacher. And he just basically absorbs everything they have until they're like, "I have nothing else to teach you. We're going to send you on." He could do this thing where he could like basically hear a song one time and have it memorized. So what he used to do is he would like climb up onto rooftops to try to like hear music teachers teaching somebody else. And he just stole all this music this way, hanging like out the windows and like... So eventually he gets to this point where he starts needing to write stuff down. So he develops his own notation system just to write and transcribe all the music. And what he was doing at the time, he was one of the only where he was at this point, there weren't too many Bengalis around. And so they called him the Bengali Babu. And he would like invite like learned people to his home where he was, and basically he would cook for them and make them food and tea and stuff, and they'd all get together. But then he would like he always did this on purpose, though, because he knew that if all they needed was like a spark, and then they'd start this musical conversation. So you'd have these great masters come over, and the reason why is because he was the Bengali Babu, he was kind of an abnormality in the area, and it was this unique kind of situation, good food, different types of stuff.
He had some kind of clout about.
There was something
knew about the
Bengali Babu. So like they would come and see him, and they would like he'd get them to come.
How old was he at this time?
Now I'm not. There's somewhere he was like probably like in his 20s, maybe even in his 30s at this point.
Young man,
yeah, he was a younger man. But what he'd do is he would have these guys come, and then he would get them somehow to talk about music. He'd leave the room, and then they'd start reciting all these old compositions, different tabla patterns, different songs, and he would just start writing everything down. And so he just basically took everybody's music. So it's like, it's kind of contentious, man. I mean, he was out there jacking everybody's stuff, but he was like trying so hard to get it because he wasn't related to these people. And so all this stuff was kept kind of hidden. Mm-hmm. And back in the day, like nowadays, dude, we can hear a recording of an old master. We have technology that can like loop it, pitch adjust it, tempo adjust it. If you heard some crazy line that you're like, dude, what the hell was that? You're like, you heard it in concert, like that was the dopest thing I ever heard. It's gone. Right. Unless you remembered it. But now it's like, dude, you just like loop that thing, like make it slower, and you're like, all right, time to like sit down and study this thing and see what's up.
But he had built up already earlier, like that biological to processor to be able to store it just off of first hearing.
And if he needed to remember it after that, he would write his own notation out. So he just took all this stuff and he ends up consolidating all this crazy amount of information. And now this story is it's already getting longer. So the idea is that he at one point there's a king that basically is having a contest rather, for kind of like nationwide to be like, whoever wants to be my court musician has to come and prove themselves. And so all these musicians come from far and wide to play for the king. And he basically had at this point learned a bunch of different instruments. And he could play violin, he could sing, he ends up learning Western classical as well for a long time. And I forget if he had already been doing it at this point, but he could play a bunch of instruments. And he is out there playing all these instruments, and they're pretty darn good because all he did was practice. But he heard this one gentleman playing the Sarod, and which is what we play. He heard an old version of it, and he's like, that was for him like the coolest sound he'd ever heard in his life. And he was like, what am I doing? He has all these instruments and he can play, and he's like, but I can't sound like that. That's what I want. And he tries to go and study with this gentleman, and I think I might be mixing up some of the time, but the important stuff is that he learns some of it, and he eventually wants to find this one guru, this Muhammad Wazir Khan Sahib, who I talked about a little bit earlier, an hour and a half ago, probably, something like that. And the dude won't take him in, though. He tries to go to the guy's house, and he gets pushed away basically by the family. Like, no, he's not taking any disciples. No, he won't see you. And so the story goes is that for 3 years, he goes every single day to try to meet this man. Every single day, they tell him no. He's never met him. He's only talked to like the servants and the family who just keep sending him away.
Has he heard him play?
Yes, he's heard him play. And so it's just that he's the one that he needs to go study with, basically. And I forget if like he was told to go study with him or he heard him somehow, and that's why he had to. But this was the guy that he wanted to be with. So at this point, he is a few years into this, and he's still living. He's playing music and all this kind of stuff. He decides to take his own life. He's like, dude, if I can't study with this guy, there's no point to keep living anymore. And so he actually ends up getting like a vial of like poison. And he's like, I have one last ditch effort. I'm going to go stop this king. I'm going to jump in front of his carriage, and I'm going to like request, and I'm going to just like plead on my knees for him to help me. And so that's what he does. He goes and he basically follows the king, like leaving the palace, and he jumps in front of the carriage with the horses, and all the guards have their weapons drawn on him. And basically the king's like, what are you doing? And he's like, please, like, sir, your majesty, I need to study with this person. I'm a really well-learned musician, and I can't. I've been trying for like 3 years, and he won't see me. And he's like, I even bought this bottle of poison to take my life if he won't. You're my last hope. He's his Obi-Wan, basically, you know? And the king's like, that's pretty drastic, okay? You say you can play all these instruments. And he's like, yes. And he's like, okay, well, bring them, meet me back at the palace with all your things, and I'll hear you. So he goes and grabs his instruments. He comes back to the palace and he plays for the king. And the king's like, you are fantastic. Like, of course, I'll try to get you an audience with him. And then it turns out, as he reaches out to Muhammad Wazir Khan Sahib, the king, that he had never known that this boy had been coming to his house for 3 years. No one ever told him. He just was doing his thing, and they just kept turning him away.
Right.
No one ever thought to say that this guy had been coming for like 3 years.
Right.
So the king requests an audience now. Now from the king, it's a different story.
Totally.
And I think it was even like after you heard him play, he did what you said, where it's like you still have to like prove your worth. So there was still like a period of time afterwards that he had to prove himself before he could study. And then eventually he does. And the craziest thing about this is that once he becomes his disciple, at this point he was a right-handed musician. But, you know, there's a bunch of different stories about this, but the one I always heard from my dad was that they made like lamb curry. And my grandfather was a vegetarian. Oh, he was a Bengali vegetarian, though, because he ate fish, so it's really like a pescatarian. But they're like, fish, it's not meat, it's like vegetables. So like, I don't know about that. But effectively, he's like, he felt so wrong, like he had done a disservice to his guru, that like he couldn't accept this like blessing that his guru was giving him, this beautiful meal, to pay tribute, basically, recompense, like to kind of like honor him. He's like, I will show you my devotion by playing left-handed now. And he was like in his mid-30s at this point. So it's like, dude, imagine like just playing left-handed now or reversing your hands. Yeah. You're like, what?
What?
So he just starts playing left-handed. Everything. Then he also was like a carpenter. He'd learned throughout his life. So then he starts developing all of his instruments. He starts drilling holes on the other sides, turns all his instruments left-handed, and just is now left-handed when it comes to music. And so everything you hear him play, like there's that picture of him back there. He's the one that's in the center. That's him playing a sarod. That's my grandfather. He's playing a left-handed sarod at that time. And so the crazy thing when I said that about my namesake, the king that saved his life is named Manik Bahadur. And so my name is Manik Bahadur Ali Khan. So I was named after that guy who saved that king who saved that dude,
that dude, yeah.
The king who saved my grandfather. Yeah. So fast forward, a whole bunch of other stuff happens, and he is the legend that he is. But they say he could play like 200 instruments. Well, he played like bagpipes and stuff like that too. He learned everything he possibly could and created instruments. But yeah, that's kind of the crazy story. That's the very, very cliff noted version of it.
Yeah,
we have his journals, and he writes all crazy, really detailed stuff about his thoughts and his life. And
dude, gotta make a movie, man.
It would be a dope movie.
Let me know. I'm a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I'm down,
that's
dude.
Sick.
That's a story I'd love to tell, dude. That'd be sick. Well, dude,
right.
Manik, thank you so much for your time.
Bro.
I feel like we could keep going. We could probably do like a bunch of these. And when you're back from India, let's connect. I feel like I've got so much more I want to ask you.
Yeah, sorry, you just talked about like specific things. Yeah,
no,
we're good.
This was amazing. I'm stoked on this episode, and I'm really grateful that you came on. How can people find and connect with you and your art? What's the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, we had a whole conversation about this before we got on air about social media and all these things, which we didn't even talk about. I know that was one of the things we were gonna. You can find me on social media, Instagram, and my handles are Manik the 8th. I am the 8th son.
Okay.
And that is why I am Manik the 8th.
And you're like the baby, right? You're the youngest son?
Medina. Oh, yeah, I'm the youngest son. Medina is the youngest girl.
Medina is the youngest child.
Yes, yes. Yeah. I'm the 8th son, the 11th kid, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So Manik the 8th, Manik, looks like Manik with a K, but it's Manik. Manik the 8th, and or manikkhan.com. That's my website, and that's got links to everything. But yeah.
And you're about to take off on an epic tour of India, right?
Hopefully pretty epic. Yeah, I'm going with my brother Alam. He hasn't been back for quite a few years. I haven't been back since before the pandemic. Right, I got back right as the pandemic started, basically here, and a little bit before. So yeah, I'm stoked, man. We're gonna go. He's got a bunch of shows. I have some shows. We're playing together. Super excited to be back there with him too. See a bunch of family, old friends, reconnect with people, and get into the deep practice abroad. Well,
Manik Baba, thank you so much for coming on the show, dude.
Yo, dude.
I appreciate you.
Much love, man. And, thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude. Until the next time.
Yeah, if anybody made it this far, you are a champion.
We appreciate you out there. Much love.
Yo.
On the digital waves.
Yeah, the Bartcast, dude.
Peace.